gentlemen, welcome to DFI Green Finance Forum 2023. I would like to invite all participants to be seated as our event will commence very soon. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I would like to highlight some important housekeeping announcements. Firstly, please make sure that you have registered at the registration counter in front of the auditorium. Participants are not allowed to bring food or beverages into the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, smoking is strictly prohibited in Sasana Kijang, except at the designated area near the security post or entry point at LG4 and at the KMC Terrace area. In the unlikely event that we need to evacuate, guests are requested to proceed to the ground floor lobby of Sasana Kijang. Participants are kindly requested to switch your mobile phones to silent mode for smooth running of the event. And last but not least, for all Muslim attendees, kindly note that transportation for Friday prayers will be provided. Vans will depart from the lobby to Madrasah Bustanul Ulum from 1 p.m. and the last trip from the mosque to Sasana Kijang will be at 2:30 p.m. Thank you. Greetings to Encik Suhaimi Ali, Assistant Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, Encik J. Khairul Jeremy Abdullah, Vice Chairman, Association of Development Finance Institutions of Malaysia, ADFIM, and Chief Executive Officer of Bank Simpanan Nasional, Ms. Rekha Reddy, Senior Financial Sector Specialist, World Bank Group, Insinyur Haji Muhammad Prasad Hanif, Secretary General of ADFIM, Distinguished Board of Directors, Chief Executive Officers, and Senior Management of DFIs, respected BNM officials, industry players, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning. Welcome to DFI Green Finance Forum 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, recognizing the critical role played by DFIs in promoting financial stability, inclusion, and driving economic growth, the Association of Development Finance Institutions of Malaysia, ADFIM, supported by Bank Negara Malaysia and the World Bank Group, has taken the initiative to organize this timely forum focusing on the theme of empowering DFIs to bridge funding gaps and drive economic and climate resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will have the opportunity to learn from the industry experts and knowledgeable World Bank speakers, engage in productive discussions and explore the potential partnerships and collaborations to strengthen DFI's contribution in driving the sustainability agenda. Not to forget, participants are highly encouraged to visit the mini exhibition concurrently held in Conference Hall 2, featuring various green solutions providers at your convenience throughout the day. Ladies and gentlemen, to kickstart the forum, I would like to cordially invite Encik J. Khairul Jeremy Abdullah, Vice Chairman of ADFIM and Chief Executive Officer of Bank Simpanan Nasional, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Please welcome. Encik J, over to you.
Thank you, MC. Yang berbahagia Encik Suhaimi Ali, Assistant Governor Bank Negara Malaysia. Yang berusaha Encik Prasad, Secretary General of ADFIM. Respected Bank Negara Malaysia officials, distinguished Board of Directors, Chief Executive Officers, and representative of ADFIM members, industry players, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. Firstly, let me warmly welcome everyone to the DFI Green Finance Forum with the theme of empowering DFIs to bridge funding gaps and drive economic and climate resilience. It's good to see familiar faces, many old comrades also in the audience today. Thank you very much for your attendance. Today we gather here at the prestigious Sasana Kijang, united by the shared vision of the Association of Development Finance Institutions of Malaysia, ADFIM, in collaboration with Bank Negara Malaysia and also the World Bank Group. Together we embark on a journey to empower development financial institutions, or DFIs, and make tangible impact on Malaysia's sustainable development goals and its pledge to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. I know it's an early session, it's a breezy morning, but what better way to enjoy the lush morning and appreciate nature by discussing green financing. We can agree that green financing is happening and will be the way forward. It is also said that money doesn't grow on trees. Perhaps it's time for us to challenge that notion and plant the seeds of financial growth amidst the blossoming branches of environmental prosperity. In green finance, we strive for financial gain and a world where economic prosperity and environmental stewardship coexist harmoniously. We are privileged to have a very good lineup of distinguished speakers from various backgrounds representing various esteemed organizations, including the World Bank, to speak on green finance. Right after me will be AG Suhaimi. I just spoke to him briefly. Thank goodness I speak before him because it's hard to speak after him. I want to sincerely thank the presenters and speakers for their invaluable presence and for their sharing of their expertise with all of us today. Thank you very much. As DFIs, we hold the key to unlocking the potential of sustainable development by financing projects that align with the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, outlined in the 12th Malaysian Plan and the Bank Negara Malaysia Financial Sector Blueprint. Our mission is to pave the way for progress in critical sectors such as housing, transport, energy, water and information communications technology, or ICT, and it is our mandate as DFIs to develop and promote these key sectors as they are of strategic importance to the social economy progress of our nation. We focus on exploring innovative green finance solutions and forging partnerships, as sustainability is an ongoing journey that demands collective effort. As DFIs, we can contribute by prioritizing 6 main initiatives: mobilizing capital for green projects, addressing market gaps and risks, fostering innovation and knowledge sharing, promoting policy and regulatory frameworks, strengthening capacity and skills, and promoting social and environmental co-benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, as we delve into green finance, it becomes evident that DFIs are crucial in mobilizing capital for sustainable projects. The capital market presents significant opportunities for project owners seeking funds for sustainable and green initiatives. And in this regard, we must confront the prevailing market gaps and associated risks head-on. DFIs are the crucial link between traditional financing and the financing required for sustainable development, as stated by the Asian Development Bank. By leveraging on our knowledge, networks, and resources, DFIs can provide the required support and guidance, thereby minimizing risks and increasing the viability of green financing projects. Strategic partnerships and collaborations will enable DFIs to foster innovation and knowledge sharing in the green finance space, and we should explore financing opportunities for underserved or unserved areas, especially in areas less addressed by the mainstream banks, by collaborating with associations, fintech companies, startups, and pilot projects to drive greener initiatives further. Ladies and gentlemen, let us reflect on the crucial role that the DFIs play in shaping a sustainable future for the nation. We are the key to mobilizing capital, addressing the market gaps, fostering innovation, and advocating for favorable policies and capacity building. Our actions will contribute to the broader sustainable development goals and pave the way for a greener and resilient future. Thank you everyone once again for your dedication and unwavering commitment to the cause of green financing and sustainability, and let us embark on this journey together and build a sustainable and prosperous Malaysia. Thank you very much everyone. Have a very good session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, JJ. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite Encik Suhaimi Ali, Assistant Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, to deliver the opening address. Please welcome. AG Suhaimi, the floor is now yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Earlier this year, heavy rainfall flooded 5 states in Malaysia, forcing over 30,000 victims to leave their homes. In December last year, a tragic landslide in Batang Kali claimed the lives of 31 out of 92 victims. These events resulted in significant financial losses, infrastructure damage, and most tragically, loss of precious lives. Floods, droughts, heat waves, loss of biodiversity, rising sea levels, and coastal erosions are several climate risks we face going into the future due to climate change. Mitigation and adaptation efforts by all parties, including businesses and households, will be crucial to reduce these risks. DFIs have a role to play in these efforts. As we navigate the path ahead, it is important that we avoid the pitfalls of hasty actions or inaction, while at the same time strive to preserve and advance decades-long progress in financial inclusion. My remarks this morning will touch on 3 imperatives, namely industry partnership, blended finance, and policy influence, that in my view will sharpen the role of DFIs in contributing to Malaysia's aspiration to achieving net zero by as early as 2050. Firstly, DFIs can catalyze change through purposeful partnership with industry players, government agencies, and financial institutions. By leveraging each other's expertise and pooling resources, DFIs can implement effective strategies that would otherwise be challenging to take on alone. For example, the Coastal Climate Resilient Infrastructure Project, CCRIP, in Bangladesh exemplifies such collaboration between multiple DFIs and the government. Funding from the International Fund for Agriculture Development, Asian Development Bank, KfW, and the government of Bangladesh supports CCRIP's goal of improving the infrastructure in disaster-prone regions in southwest Bangladesh. The project focuses on constructing climate-resilient roads designed to endure cyclones through strategic engineering using resistant materials, raised constructions, and effective flood and erosion management. CCRIP has achieved significant outcomes, benefiting local farmers and entrepreneurs by improving accessibility and connectivity in remote areas, even during the monsoon season. The project not only builds and upgrades markets, but also significantly boosts sales and agriculture produce and enhances access to inputs. Additionally, CCRIP enhances climate change adaptation capacity and promotes employment opportunities and gender empowerment. CCRIP also demonstrates the power of collective action in addressing specific national economic issues or local community development, and therefore sets a compelling precedent for Malaysian DFIs. Instead of working in isolation, DFIs can leverage pooled resources and expertise to jointly deliver targeted support, catalyze effective infrastructure development, and drive transformative change. Secondly, DFIs can use blended finance to mobilize both public and private capital, specifically targeting near-bankable projects with significant economic spillover. By blending different sources of capital, such as government grants, concessional funds, and private capital, the project risk can be diversified to align with the risk appetite of each capital provider. An example of a successful blended finance is the Philippines Water Revolving Fund, or known as PWRF. PWRF is a co-financing facility by the Development Bank of the Philippines in collaboration with Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, and USAID to incentivize commercial banks to lend to the water and sanitation sector. Key features include a sovereign guarantee by the Philippines Department of Finance, a credit risk guarantee by a private guarantor, and technical capacity building programs in water project appraisal for inexperienced lenders. The fund has successfully channeled over 234 million US dollars towards 21 water and sanitation projects, with approximately 60% crowded in from commercial banks. As a result, roughly 6 million people now have improved access to piped water. This success story exemplifies how blended finance can unlock private sector participation and generate positive economic and social outcomes. Thirdly, DFIs have the capacity to influence government policy to build long-term solutions. Given DFI's wealth of expertise and a holistic understanding of the sectors and segments served, as well as close affiliation with government bodies, DFIs are well positioned to surface pain points and advise governing bodies on suitable policies to achieve climate goals. A good case of policy additionality is the Malacca Green City Action Plan, or GCAP, developed by the Malacca State Government with technical assistance from the Asian Development Bank. Through this policy, the Malacca State Government was able to reduce carbon emissions and energy costs by transforming 120,000 streetlights into smart LED streetlights. Subsequently, the federal government has requested ADB to support the development of subsequent GCAPs for 14 selected cities in the country. Malaysian DFIs can draw inspiration from this collaboration to strengthen capacity and assume a more influential role in shaping government policies. Embracing this opportunity for policy additionality is not only crucial for progress, but also aligns perfectly with the expected responsibilities of DFIs. Finally, the role of the industry association, ADFIM, cannot be underestimated. As the collective body representing DFI's interests, ADFIM has traditionally leveraged its influence to champion common interests and resolve industry issues. However, ADFIM is poised to go further by fostering industry collaboration and promote knowledge sharing among its members through exchange of best practices and issuance of technical papers. Through these efforts, ADFIM can become an enabler for greener Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, the bank acknowledges that the path ahead may present challenges for DFIs. Therefore, today's forum provides a platform for open dialogues where we can learn from each other's experiences, discuss emerging trends, and identify relevant opportunities for the DFI industry. We believe DFIs have the potential to become trailblazers in addressing climate change, and we actively seek partnership with visionary DFIs to introduce innovative sustainability-linked financing initiatives before the JC3 conference later this year, or at the very least for Budget 2024. In closing, I want to leave you with the powerful words of Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, from her opening remarks at the UN COP26. She said, "If our existence is to mean anything, then we must act in the interests of all our people who are dependent on us. The heart-wrenching story of a grieving grandmother collecting the bodies of her daughter's family of 4 in the Batangkali tragedy is a stark reminder that climate change is escalating and its impact is striking closer and closer to home. This tragic reality demands our swift and decisive action to mitigate its devastating impact and ensure no Malaysian gets left behind in the transition towards a low-carbon economy. On that note, I wish all of you a fruitful discussion in the sessions ahead, and I look forward to tangible outcomes from these discussions. Thank you, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, AG, for the inspiring messages calling DFIs to action in the green finance space. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, let us commemorate this event with a group photo session, and hence I'd like to invite our official photographers to be on the stage, and for all of the audience to please stand up. Thank you. And for the audience on the left and also right rows, please squeeze into the center of the auditorium for better optics. Can we have everyone to give your best smile? Right. We still have empty front seats. Could you please, at the back, to fill up the front seats? To just stand the seats in front here. All right, smile everyone in count of 3. 1, 2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, and 3. All right, thank you very much. You may return to your seats. And once again, thank you to Assistant Governor Suhaimi Ali for the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, let us embark on our learning journey with the first session, Greening National Development Financial Institutions, Global Trends, Lessons Learned and Ways Forward. Our first speaker of the day is Ms. Eva Gutierrez, the Lead Financial Sector Specialist, Global Lead State-Owned Financial Institutions of the World Bank Group. Ms. Gutierrez, who will be joining us virtually from Washington, D.C., is a lead financial sector specialist in finance, competitiveness, and innovation global practice at the World Bank Group for the Eastern Europe and Central Asia region. She is currently responsible in coordinating the entire portfolio of operations of the finance and development sector of the private sector, including investment climate, competitive industries, and innovation and entrepreneurship at the World Bank Group. So I'll have Ms. Eva with me online. Ms. Eva, can you hear and listen me clearly? Can you hear and see me clearly? Yes?
Yes, I can.
Yes. So it is basically you can only see me, but together with me is more than 250 participants watching you live from Kuala Lumpur. So it is around 8:30 p.m. So have you had your dinner?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes. That is lovely. So we are excited to gain insights from you. So ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome Miss Eva Gutierrez.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to join us. It's a pleasure to be here. I had to let you know that I'm no longer working in Europe and Central Asia, but in the Latin American region of the World Bank, where I don't coordinate the whole portfolio of operations of the World Bank, but I lead the dialogue at the global level on development financial institutions, even though if now I'm in Latin America. What I'm going to be talking today in this first session is actually very much along the lines of what the Deputy Governor was talking about in his speech, but I'm going to provide figures and some observations from development financial institutions around the world. If you allow me, I will now share my screen with the presentation that I have prepared. And please you let me know if you can see it clearly.
Yes, we can.
So what I'm going to be presenting today is a brief summary of a report that is forthcoming, that it's called Green and National Development Financial Institutions, Trends, Lessons Learned and Ways Forward, the same as the session, and that I have written together with colleagues at the World Bank listed here. One of them, Rachel, will be participating later in a session in blended finance. So let me set. Oh, for some reason, cannot. Let me set the stage for the presentation. There will be a brief introduction and context. Then we will talk about the state and trends regarding green activities and practices of national development financial institutions, and a couple of toolkits that we have included in this paper. Is like a list of things that can support institutions in achieving some of their sustainable goals. So just moving into the context section, very briefly, as you all know, investment needs for just transition to a climate resilient and low carbon society are massive. We estimate that, well, the NGFS estimates that in the next, in 30 years, it starting in 2021, there will be 273 trillion needed to reach net zero goals in 2050, with about 9.2 trillion per year. Of which 3.5 trillion are needed investments, new investments beyond what is already happening. And every time that I see these figures seems to grow. So we can take this with a grain of salt, but we can say is that it's massive needs. And actually what we are seeing at the World Bank is based on the data that we are getting from our climate development report, is that investment needs are even larger as a share of GDP in countries, in low-income countries, which are the ones who have contributed less to the problem that we are facing now of climate change, because these are not the countries that have emitted more. But unfortunately, these countries with limited capacity are the ones who need to invest a larger share of GDP. The current funding that is provided is currently way off of what is required. So if we see we need to do a massive jump in investments to reach the 1.5 pathway associated with the net zero. what we are seeing is that in low and middle income countries, currently the financing it's about 425 billion. This was the data for 2019-2020. And this is probably overestimated because East Asia Pacific is, as you will see, the region that accumulates most of this financing, but Japan and Korea were included here. So these are not really low and middle income countries. But if we see the trends, what we can see is most of this financing is in the East Asian Pacific region. Most of the financing is overwhelmingly for mitigation. There's very little financing for adaptation. And most of the financing, the majority of the financing comes from public sources. And doing a deep dive of this financing, the Development Committee found that actually national development financial institutions are the biggest financier among the public sector for climate-related issues. About 40% of public financing, public sector financing comes from NDFIs. So NDFIs are the leader in public finance actually in total finance for climate in low and middle income countries. But the problem is that it's insufficient vis-a-vis the needs. That said, NDFIs already play an important role in climate finance, and they could play an even bigger role. I'm here and echoing some of the themes that the Deputy Governor was talking about. They can address market failures, they can cut in private sector investments through different de-risking instruments, through blended finance, through the creation of markets, but also they can support the country policies and investment plans, can help on the formulation. They have a lot of expertise in the institutions that can help to inform projects and pipelines of projects, and they can also create an enabling environment for private investment. They do that by demonstration transactions, by creating infrastructure for green finance, etc. No? So just to give an example of this type of information, of interventions, for example, some institutions have been pioneers on their countries in developing taxonomies, green taxonomies that then has been used by the industry more or large and eventually picked up by the regulator, to align investments towards green objectives. So, as I mentioned, the World Bank tried to develop a position paper on this topic of green NDFIs, and this is this report that will be soon published. We are in the final stages of editing and graphic designing. We hope that it will be ready for the forthcoming Financing Common Summit in Cartagena. So actually, I'm giving you a preview of this World Bank report. But the components of this assessment to see the degrees of greenness of the national development financial institutions include green governance and strategy, green finance tools, uses and sources, so on the asset and on the liability side of the balance sheet, climate and environmental risk management, and disclosure and reporting. And to write this paper, we did a lot of this research. We sent a survey to the national development financial institutions that account for about 80% of the total sector assets. We only receive responses from 22 of these institutions, but this is a relatively good sample. We sent it to 27. Then we also conducted in-depth study cases for 4 institutions. And with that, we help to provide to build some toolkits for institutions based on what we thought it was the state of the art. So very briefly, just you might well be very familiar with this, but at the global level, NDFIs are highly diverse. So what we see is that most of the national development financial institutions, and this is according by the survey put together by for the FIC by FAD and Chinese researchers, that most of the national development financial institutions are in the majority are the largest group of institutions is located in high and middle income countries, meanwhile lower middle income countries and low income countries have a lower number of institutions. So this idea of the national development financial institutions is associated to development countries and low-income countries is not true. They are more prevalent in the large. They are more frequent in the wealthier countries. East Asia, Europe and Central Asia, and East Asia Pacific are the two regions with the larger number of institutions, albeit there are also many in Sub-Saharan Africa and LAC, similar to East Asia Pacific. And what we see that these institutions in low-income countries, probably because the markets are smaller, these institutions tend to have a general mandate, but they are more specialized in high and middle-income countries, where typically you have more than one institutions. Most common is mandate is they are focusing on SME and Exim opportunity and on Exim banking. But when you move towards developing countries, you see more general mandate. Low-income countries, you see more general mandates and more focus in agriculture. So this is to understand where do the institutions fit, and it's important. That doesn't mean that they cannot be green. They should all aim to be green. And actually, we saw that in low-income countries, the investment needs as a share of GDP are even larger than in income countries. But it's important to understand that the focus is in agriculture and the type of products and solutions that can be applicable to them, as well as general purposes. Let me see. I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't know why I have some problems. So moving to the state and trends, which is the results of the survey. If we look at the strategy and governance components, we see that overall the institutions in the survey have a high-level commitment to the green agenda. Most of them, they have a mandate or a mission that includes environmental objectives. Most of the development financial institutions do not have an explicit mandate on climate. What we have, most of them, is a mandate that relates to sustainability. And then through that sustainability link, or sustainable growth, or sustainable agriculture, is that then they use that mandate to formulate a strategy and a mission that explicitly then incorporates climate aspects. So while in some cases there's a lot of importance given to the mandate, we need to include climate in the mandate, many institutions manage even with the existing mandates within the legal existing frameworks to really advance into the greening strategy. More than 80% of the institutions in the survey, they have a strategy prepared to green their portfolio. They have a slightly lower number, but more than half, they have made pledges to align with national development goals. And they are somehow involved in the implementation of the NDCs. That said, very few have explicitly disclosed targets for the national determined contribution. So it's more aspirationally than really concrete and some responsibility for achieving these targets allocated at the level of the DFI. That said, many of these institutions they have made these pledges, but actually not that many actually disclose, and we will see that later, the green assets on their portfolio. So it seems to be that there is a mismatch between the aspiration and actually how this strategy and this vision is implemented in practice. As per the governance, more than half of the institutions in the survey have incorporated climate considerations in the government. In the governance, they typically have, many of them have sustainability committees, or they have a person in the board which is responsible for the sustainable strategy, and they are working in including throughout the institution that green climate environmental perspective, defining organs within the institution, bodies within the institution, or persons which are responsible for the implementation of the strategy. Overall, even as we notice, from the survey, what we see is that NDFIs, they provide 22% of the total global finance. So they are the largest provider of green finance. In our sample, out of the 22 institutions that report, only 12 disclose the share of green assets in their portfolio. And what we see is there is wide variety. On average, so it's really put it, on average is 14% of the portfolio, but there are institutions in which is basically close to zero, and only for one institution this was over 50% of the loan portfolio, or the asset portfolio, that it was into green assets. And the investments, they are basically the sectors, the green sectors are basically focused on power, so efficient renewable energy in agriculture and in transport mostly. Okay. Another thing that we observe is that so far limited focus on private capital mobilization. So the institutions, most of it has green targets, and the institutions try to align their operations with these targets by focusing on certain, mostly focusing on certain sectors, but also excluding certain activities from their financing. But very few institutions, or less than half of the institutions track the level of private sector funding mobilized for green finance. No. The other thing that we see, there is still a quite ample room for institutions to tap capital markets for green finance purposes. While most of the institutions in the survey fund themselves from international capital markets, only half of them have issued a green bond, and less than a third have issued a sustainability-linked bond. And accreditation to climate funds still offers a window of opportunity. Less than 40% of the institutions are accredited to, for example, the Green Climate Fund. The institutions reported several challenges to scaling up green finance, but the two most common quoted by the institutions was the lack of effective public policies and regulations, including the absence of green taxonomies, reporting standards, carbon taxes, and other supporting policies. And a problem that also mentioned is the lack of the funding gap, the lack of capital and available sources of finance at favorable conditions to the risk projects. Finally, what we saw also is that climate and environmental risk management practices among the institutions in the survey are still quite nascent. Basically, the institutions, most of them, they have adopted some type of climate and environmental safeguards. So they are able to assess and mitigate the risk that their operations have in the environment. And this is so because in many cases they receive funding from multilaterals or from donors that have these obligations associated to their funding. But what the institutions, very few do, is assess the risk that climate can pose to their portfolios. And for example, stress testing, scenario analysis, and measure of climate risk at the portfolio level, it's quite underdeveloped. So, for example, less than 25% of the institutions conducted scenario analysis or stress testing to assess these risks. Finally, the institutions typically have some internal systems, either taxonomies, or they have some internal classification systems to track green finance volumes. Sometimes they use climate bond initiatives type of taxonomy or something developed by the institution themselves. But they track these green finance volumes, as I said, but they don't disclose many of them. And really, only one of the institutions surveyed, TSKB, issues a formal disclosure in line with the task force for climate-related financial disclosures. So disclosure is also a big area of opportunity. So with this in mind, we proposed a toolkit for to green the operations of national development financial institutions that looks at these 4 pillars that we have been discussing: the governance strategy, the green finance, the risk management, and the disclosure and reporting. So as per the governance strategy, so we think that the first step is to develop an internal strategy to manage climate and environmental risks and to develop green finance. Typically, these strategies they involve measuring. So it's important as a first step to start measure what is the carbon footprint of the firms with which the national development financial institutions operate. And here there are some tools, for example, the Coalition for Carbon Disclosure, was created to help support financial institutions, public or private, to help measure the carbon footprint of the clients. So the first step will be to try to measure, then set up some targets which should be consistent with the national with the NDCs and with the national development goals. Then steering the balance sheet towards the compliance with these targets, and finally some commitments to disclose how this progress is being achieved. It's important to develop an internal governance to ensure that this strategy is effectively implemented, and I see there has to be a system of committees of reporting and involvement of the board of directors of the institution to ensure that this strategy is implemented. And it's important for the institutions also to engage in national and international networks. That will be very helpful to develop the strategy. On the area of green finance, the focus should be of the national development financial institutions of crowding in private finance. This is so because the needs are so great that it's impossible to meet them only with the strength of the balance sheet. But national development financial institutions can play a very important catalytic role. And this catalytic role can be played in many different ways. The first one is at the level of creating a pipeline, really. You can crowd in private sector finance by creating a pipeline of projects and helping them to make them bankable. On the first hand, national development financial institutions in some cases can, in some cases have, and if not, they should develop expertise in-house to help with project preparation and design, and provide also technical assistance to their clients to develop these projects and create a pipeline of bankable opportunities. Then they can devise the financial instruments to crowd in private sector finance, and this could be through co-investments, through subordinated debt, to equity investments. In many cases, it could be also through public-private equity funds, credit enhancements, and credit guarantees to the risk the projects. Then they can also help to the risk the project by channeling concessional financing through blended finance, and they can also facilitate financing of projects by aggregating and warehousing projects. So, for example, they can create platforms where you can aggregate carbon credits from small agricultural products, agricultural projects, or forestry projects, conservation projects, and then you can aggregate those carbon credits and sell it in the platform, helping to make those projects bankable. It can also securitize portfolios of small loans, or they can create a multi-originator securitization platform to facilitate the securitization of these portfolios. So there are many ways in they can aggregate small projects to make them obtain, to mobilize private sector finance for those projects, capital markets, and to make them scale and to reach scale. And also they can do demonstration transactions create markets by demonstrating transactions. Development banks have done that in many cases by, for example, being the first issuers in the markets on green bonds. This was the case, for example, of NAFIN in Mexico and in many other countries. And now they are moving to develop sustainability linked bonds. The World Bank is just approved a project to support the Development Bank of Rwanda to launch the his first sustainability linked bond. But there are many examples in which development banks can create markets for new products by launching new products. Actually, the World Bank is not a development bank; it's a public bank with a social orientation. But the World Bank just approved a project with Banco do Brasil in Brazil to help develop a sustainability linked loan market. Regarding the climate and environment risk management, I think it's important that the institutions start conducting forward-looking climate and environmental risk assessments. It's important to move beyond the safeguards approach and move also into management of risk at the level of the portfolio. And it's important to start incorporating the climate risk management at all levels of the institution, from the credit origination to the risk management to the internal control, through the 3 lines of defense of the institution. And finally, with disclosure and reporting, it's important to implement tracking methodologies to be able to measure not only the carbon footprint of the portfolio, but also tracking the compliance with the targets, and also once the risk management improves, and the measurement of the risk of the portfolio improves, start disclosing what are the climate and environmental risks associated to the portfolio. National governments and financial regulators can also support this by creating the policy enabling environment for greening NDFIs. As I mentioned, taxonomies, carbon taxes, exchange traded formal carbon markets, ETFs, etc. NDFIs governments can help NDFIs to access multilateral funding and international capital markets, and also can help aligning mandates and missions with climate and environmental objectives, tweaking as needed. And as I said, in all cases is not needed, but the legal framework on which these national development financial institutions operate. Very briefly, one of the things that we call attention is the need for increasing adaptation financing. And here also in the paper, we present an outline or a roadmap of activities that national development financial institutions can take to try to mobilize finance for adaptation financing. I don't want to get too much into that because I'm running a bit late. And just to let you know that the World Bank has many venues in which they can support the greening of NDFIs through technical assistance, knowledge sharing, provision of funding, and also providing support to governments, working with governments to create the enabling policy environment which is needed to the development of green finance. And with that, sorry if I took a little bit too long. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eva, for the inspiring and also insightful presentation on greening NDFIs. Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together once again for Ms. Eva all the way from the Washington. We hope to see you again in the near future, physically, hopefully. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next session, kindly scan the QR code on the screen and appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to complete this quick survey. Some of the attendees cannot access the QR code, or all of you cannot access. I think we just proceed. Later on, we can have the QR code once again. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we enhance our awareness on the global trends in green finance, it is equally, if not more important, to apply those insights to the Malaysian perspective. For the second session, we are going to listen to a panel discussion on protecting vulnerable Malaysian communities, exploring DFI funding for climate resilience. The panelists will discuss on DFI funding strategies and their crucial roles in safeguarding vulnerable Malaysian communities from natural disasters. For that, ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome on the stage the moderator, Insinyur Haji Muhammad Prasad Hanif, Secretary General of ADFIM. Insinyur Prasad, the floor is now yours, and also to invite the rest of the panelists.
Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this empowering session titled Protecting Vulnerable Malaysian Communities, Exploring DFI Funding for Climate Resilience. I am IR Haji Muhammad Prasad bin Hanif, Secretary General of ADFIM, and I'm honored to be the moderator for today's session. Is everybody still with me today? Still with me at this hour? Okay, fantastic, right? So everybody's awake, everybody's wide. So ladies and gentlemen, I have this huge introduction, long introduction prepared, but I'm going to skip that in lieu of time. In the context of climate resilience, the role of DFIs is pivotal. The growing severity of climate change, especially in emerging markets, necessitates urgent action for climate resilience and adaptation. The consideration is always about short-term needs balanced with long-term climate change goals. DFIs, with their financial resources and development mandates, are uniquely positioned to catalyze significant engagement and finance towards climate resilience. This includes understanding the challenges and opportunities associated with financing climate resilience and developing ways to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, through such financing. Furthermore, engaging and equipping central banks with policy options tailored to support climate-related supervisory and credit guidance policies is also within the purview of DFIs. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have two very esteemed panel of experts who will share their insights and knowledge on the subject. Our first panelist, ladies and gentlemen, is Ms. Tatiana Didier, a senior economist from the World Bank Group. The World Bank has been at the forefront of helping developing countries build resilience to the challenges posed by climate change. Ms. Tatiana Didier is a senior economist currently working at the Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Finance Hub in Malaysia. Since joining the World Bank Group in 2008, Tatiana has played a leading role on a number of country and regional policy engagements related to corporate and MSME financing, competition, fintech, and overall development of financial markets, and most recently, sustainable finance. She is the author of numerous flagship reports, and her research, spanning topics in SME financing, financial development of EMDEs, global capital markets, and international financial economics, is published in top field journals. Tatiana, holds a PhD in economics from MIT. Let's give her a warm welcome. Ms. Tatiana, please. Now, our next speaker is no less, has an amazing portfolio. We have Dr. Ching Tu Analaki Kim, Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, NRECC. Dr. Ching is deeply involved in formulating and implementing policies that address climate change and environmental issues within Malaysia. Dr. Ching Tu Kim is currently the Deputy Secretary General, Water and Sewerage of the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. He has been serving the Malaysian government as an administrative and diplomatic service officer for 26 years, where he started as an assistant secretary in the Ministry of Information of Malaysia in 1995. Later, he was promoted to principal assistant secretary in the Ministry of Energy, Water and Communications, where he was tasked to spearhead the National Water Restructuring Initiative. From 2012 to 2014, Dr. Ching was appointed as the Under-Secretary of Biofuel Division and the Head of Corporate Communication Unit at the Ministry of Plantation, Industries and Commodities. From 2014 to 2015, he was the Under-Secretary of Water Services Division and Sewerage Services Division at the Ministry of Energy, Green Technology and Water. From 2016 until May 2021, he led the Water and Sewerage Division at 3 different ministries, namely the Ministry of Energy, Green Technology and Water, Ministry of Water, Land and Natural Resources, and the Ministry of Environment and Water. Dr. Ching holds a PhD in Water Governance from Wageningen University in the Netherlands in 2012. We warmly welcome Dr. Ching to the stage. Welcome. Now it's a lot more comfortable, right? We all get to sit down. Before we dive into the discussion, I would like to point out that ADRIM has recently organized webinars titled Financing Climate Resilience, focus on DFIs in emerging markets, which brought together experts from public and private sectors worldwide. I'm also proud to mention that ADRIM has organized forums on climate financing and was featured in Climate Week NYC in 2021 and 2022. And hopefully when we organize it this year, it will be featured in 2023 as well. Now let's move forward to harness the collective wisdom of our panelists, enough of me, right? To explore how DFIs can empower and protect vulnerable communities in Malaysia through climate resilience funding. Thank you, and let's begin the discussion. Now, Ms. Tatiana, to begin, perhaps you'd be able to set the scenario and movement for diverse financing instruments utilized to enhance climate resilience in vulnerable communities. What is happening currently, and who is leading the change, if any? No, up to you.
So I have a few slides to share with you just to set the stage and in terms of the Malaysia context, complementing what Eva said in the previous session. And first of all, thank you. Thank you, the other organizers, for having me here. It's a pleasure. And hope I don't bore you for the next 10 minutes. So next slide, please. So I think emphasizing what Eva highlighted in the previous session is that mitigation has been the focus of climate finance so far. Adaptation is lagging behind, and there needs to be a bigger push for that. So there is a need to rebalance, not in the sense of not doing mitigation, but focusing and fostering more on the adaptation finance and the need for fostering that. So when you look on a global picture, financing for adaptation is roughly at 46 billion worldwide, whereas for mitigation, we're talking about 570 billion. So there's a big difference. And the graph on the middle of the screen, you can see that within the East Asian Pacific region, you see that adaptation is really tiny when you compare it to mitigation. And you see as well, Eva was emphasizing the role of public funding in climate finance. That is it's very clearly in adaptation as well. DFIs play a big role in adaptation finance, but you also see this bias towards mitigation funding for greening in DFIs. So adaptation financing from DFIs, it's still in East Asia, it's around 16% of their portfolio. So when you look at what DFIs are doing, they're also focusing on mitigation. So there is a role as well for DFIs to focus more on adaptation, on making communities, making countries, firms, private sector more resilient. So the rebalancing is it's private sector, but it's also on the public funding. And again, there's a huge financing gap. The needs haven't been met, and estimates by the UNEP adaptation report of 2021 says that globally the needs range from 150 billion to all the way to $330 billion. And we're talking about 40 billion in the marketplace. So the gap is huge. Next slide, please. So let's look at adaptation financing. And that's what I was saying, that DFIs and the government and public funding accounts for almost everything of adaptation financing. And you can see this on this figure on the left. Private funding are those two tiny squares at the bottom. That's all there is. Everything else can be traced back to public funding, and DFIs play a big role. They account for at least 70%. So the two darker blues, that's DFI funding. This is around the world. So I think a quick question is, how can DFIs play a bigger role in terms of capital mobilization here? How can DFIs play a role to increase that little private part, the orange part of this pie? So how can you improve the effectiveness of government support to mobilize private capital? How can you increase the pie? And DFI can play a catalytic role in this way. And I think to play a bigger role, to really understand and be effective, we need to understand what exactly is hindering private capital into adaptation finance. So for the next 5 minutes, that's where I'm going to go in more details into what exactly is needed. What are the market failures? What are we talking? Why is the private capital not being channeled to adaptation needs? Next slide, please. In terms of the instruments, what we see globally, it's half of the funding is being channeled through market rates, through debt financing. And the other half, it's subsidized concessional lending or grants. But what about in the case of Malaysia? What exactly is needed? What type of instruments are we looking for? So let's take a step back. Let's look at what exactly is needed for Malaysia. What are the main risks that it's needed for adaptation financing Malaysia? So next slide, please. As the AG mentioned in his keynote speech, floods are the main natural hazard in Malaysia, and what you see over time is that it's becoming more frequent. That's your red line on the screen, is the number of severe events in Malaysia on a yearly basis since 2000, and it has been increasing over the last 10 years, roughly speaking. And the blue bars is the number of affected people, and you see that it's on average it's severe, but there are some years where you have very major events that affect a significant share of the population. So it is a source of concern for Malaysia. So how do we handle that? Next slide, please. How do you manage flood risk? Where are the potential avenues for DFIs to intervene and support? So when you're thinking about managing flood risks, you need to think of the hazard. That's climate, that's hydrology, it's rainfall, it's river flood, it's the natural hazards. But then there's exposure. It's to what extent are vulnerable communities or firms exposed to this hazard. And it affects as well, it's a function of population growth, urbanization, and development. You have a greater share of assets that are exposed to these risks as you develop, as you become richer. But given that you're exposed, so there is a role that you could reduce that exposure. But if you are exposed, then there's vulnerability. And that's the other factor that, again, if I am exposed, there are measures that I can take to protect myself against that risk. So either I can reduce the risk ex ante, but if I cannot reduce, then I can try to mitigate the impact of those risks on myself. And DFIs can play a role in both cases, both in this prevention and reducing of exposure, as well as reducing the vulnerability. And for instance, I think on the exposure side, we're talking about mostly government infrastructure, for instance, projects. We're talking about levees, dams, flood walls, drainage system, nature-based solutions. That's how you address the exposure. You can mitigate, you can diminish the exposure to those hazards. Or on the vulnerability, think of working with the private sector, reducing, making communities, making firms more resilient to those risks, given that they are exposed. And there's also, as Evan emphasized in the previous session, a role for capacity building, awareness, and preparedness among the communities. Next slide, please. Some considerations, and I'll go briefly because Eva did go into some of this. When you're thinking of developing instruments to make communities more resilient, both on the preparedness and the prevention, as well as later on once firms get, or once communities and firms get hit. And I'll come back to this in a little bit. One is you need to address and align and target market failures. In the case of adaptation finance, what are we talking about? Their externalities. If, say, a community or a firm itself becomes more resilient, I'm helping those around me. I'm helping those around me become more resilient as well. So there are externalities that I may not internalize. So my investment to make my firm more resilient would affect all of those, all my clients, all my suppliers, because they can count on me if I get hit or if they get hit by an event. So there are externalities, and some of these additional benefits are not internalized. So you do get under investments in these adaptation investments. There is, in some cases, there is a lack of evident business case, in the sense that a lot of adaptation investments, the benefits are avoided losses. How do you turn that into a financial flow? How do you make that bankable? It's very hard. So the business case may not be there if you're thinking of investments by the private sector. So there is a role as well to compensate and try to think of work around that lack of incentive for firms, for instance, to make those investments. In many cases, there is a high perceived riskness of those investments, and information. I think Eva went extensively into the information environment and the challenge in that place, so I'm not gonna go into the details. Additionality, I think that's crucial. That's what I made, the point I made before. It's private capital mobilization. How do you bring in additional financing? Because public funding alone will not be enough. So you need to foster and bring in private capital. And again, demonstration effects can work. You can be the first one, the first mover, show that these are worthwhile, these are bankable projects that the private sector can undertake. Another consideration is graduation. You don't want to develop intervention or products that you'll be there forever. You want to make sure there is a roadmap for graduation, both for those who are borrowing. Eventually they graduate and can borrow at marketplace and market conditions, and for financial institutions and for yourself. What is the target goal? I'm trying to develop these markets that eventually they can function on their own. You no longer need public support. So the goal of policies, there is this role of graduation. You're trying to complete, you're trying to develop markets, and eventually you step back. So I think this is a consideration that needs to be in place even when we're talking about adaptation. And monitoring and evaluation frameworks. How do you assess whether all these other three aspects are working? You're being effective, you develop those systems to monitor the effectiveness of targeting or private capital mobilization and the sustainability of programs. Next slide, please. So when you look at, okay, let's talk about market failures, or what are the challenges for private banks, for instance, to fund adaptation. So this is a survey that we did among financial institutions here in Malaysia, and it's forthcoming in a joint report with Bank Negara Malaysia later in a few months. So it's just a preview, don't quote me yet. So when you look at what are the three challenges for banks for funding adaptation, and especially floods in Malaysia, as well as if firms get hit, what are the challenges of providing emergency funding later on to help firms recovery? Can you click the, I think I will, can you click the next as if you, yes, thank you. So the first set of challenges relate to information and lack of understanding or ability to price risks, and what is the information in the market? I cannot track those risks. I don't know exposures. I cannot calculate losses. So if I cannot price those risks, then it's very hard for financial institutions to provide funding because they cannot price those risks. Next, please. there's an issue about lack of demand, as I was saying, is the lack of a business case is there. So firms are not, there are no incentive, the incentives are more limited to undertake those investments in the first place. Next, please. Okay, so I think it disappeared. So there are issues about capabilities, and I think it might be hard for you to see, but when you look at the bottom, when you focus on the red line, that's for emergency funding. And the challenge is there, it's related to the lack of collateral, the inability to assess business prospects. So if a firm gets hit, suddenly I may have lost all my assets, all my infrastructure are damaged. So what is my business case? Banks, financial institutions will have a very hard time giving funding at that instance, because how can I assess your business? How do I know that you will be able to get out? So the challenge for emergency funding are to some extent very different than the ones you do ex ante. So ex post and ex ante require different types of interventions. So let me discuss, and this is my last slide, next slide please, on what are the type of support that DFIs can do in those two instances, with the understanding that the challenges are very different depending on when you come in, when you're trying to support our firms. So when you're talking about prevention, preparedness, reducing exposures, reducing vulnerabilities, it's about investments in prevention, in preparedness to vulnerable segments. So you need to think about risk-sharing mechanisms. As I said, there's a perception that those investments are high risk. They have high upfront payoffs as well. So some co-investments to take some of that cost, to share some of those costs up front. When we're talking about infrastructure financing, the need for long-term capital, long-term financing that may not exist in the marketplace, that private capital may not be willing to take on those long-term risks. There are also, as I mentioned, from the survey came out, the challenge about limited expertise, limited capabilities, or in an environment with limited information. So you need to think about demonstration effects, piloting new instruments, as Eva discussed. Truly for green, that also applies for adaptation finance. Project preparation, market assessment, all those challenges, all those types of non-financial support are also needed in adaptation finance. And when you think about response and recovery, you need to think about de-risking instruments. And I think guarantees here, it's a clear case, in the sense it's when you don't know whether the business is viable. So the risk of that firm, it's higher. So there is a bigger role for PCGs. There might be an argument for concessionality as well in this case. And in terms of around the world, this is something, it's an area that it's emerging and it's very new. There are very few PCGs around the world that have introduced windows or support for adaptation finance. But you start to see, and I think Morocco, for instance, is one example where you see that being developed, that emergency funding window for guarantees. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tatiana, for that presentation. I guess everybody's itching to ask questions, right? We will be opening for questions a little bit later on the last round before we close the session. But if you really do want to ask a question right now, please raise both your legs, right? Still awake? Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, proceeding, I think we need to also know what's happening in Malaysia as well, from the government perspective and from Dr. Ching's perspective as well. So we would like to hear a little bit more from NRECC. Now, perhaps you can share some valuable insights into mitigation solutions for natural disasters encompassing optimal flood barrier planning, and who's leading the charge, and what does the current statistics look like? Dr. Ching, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ajis, for inviting the Ministry to share some of our insights. Right, I will be focusing more on the water sector. Can I go to the first slide? Just to set the scene right? If you talk about water management, we are referring to three main sectors: water supply, water source, and sewerage. The third one is often forgotten. One, we flush our toilets, it goes back to the river course. This is important. And that three aspect has to be taken in a loop. So if you want to remember sewerage, please remember IWK. Have you paid your bill? That's the first question, right? Attending it for a family of 4. Is next slide. We have three dilemma in water sector. Either you have too much water, what we had last 2 years in Taman Sri Muda, a drought, and it's too polluted. This what we want to address. I will focus more on the pollution, on the flood mitigation. Too much water we have, right? And this is actually the role of DID under the ministry. Next. Just to give you some indication on the climate change impact, this is a study done by Nahrim. We expect the surface temperature to rise by 2% degrees C. That above what UNFCCC is targeted for, about 1.5 degrees C. Then we have a lot of impacts on sea level rise, intense rains, drought, prolonged droughts, right? We will have 14 to 20% annual precipitations to increase by 25%. Severe dry spell, and this will affect our food security very, very badly. Our paddy irrigation in the Muda scheme, right? And sea level rise will increase to 0.74 meter. And you have heard from the report, some of our town along the coastline will be submerged under water. And we have our booth out there. You can talk to our colleague from Nahrim to get more about this sea level rise. It's not to fear, I would say, and this is one of the mitigation that we ought to look into to make sure that we keep our feet dry. Next. Just to bring you back on the flood incidents that had happened in the country. The latest was 2021. I think some of you in this room, you might have affected by that big flood in Taman Sri Muda and some part in Johor as well, right? 6 billion of economic loss as reported by EPU then. And early this year in Johor, again, we had a series of floods. And the amount of people affected, close to 6 billion people is affected. And later this year will be released the flood hazard maps for you to plan when, if you have a plan to buy a new house in certain area. That map is will determine whether you have a right decision or not, whether the area will be flooded or not in the next 20 years or 10 years. And for insurance company, this will assist you in coming up with your own insurance protection company. And many of these so-called developers will run to you asking for protection. That flood hazard map, we call it, right? Next, adaptation is focused very much on living with flood. And we have been spending less on adaptation, more on mitigation, right? And if you're familiar with what happened in Netherlands, they used to have this notion of fighting with floods, but you've never been floods, right? You have to living with floods, making room for water. This is what we're focusing on under the Steward Malaysia plan and the idea. And the other thing is, as you mentioned, that we are going more on nature-based solutions, building, as you might aware, natural river trails, having more constructed wetlands, planting more trees. That are focusing on under the Malaysia plan. Moving on to the next slides. On the mitigation sides, we focus very much on structural and non-structural approach. 80% of the budget goes into structural approaches, building more dams, diversions, barns, protection ponds, the pump house. Just to give you a bit of information, we have 104 dams in the country. About 16 are flood mitigation dams. And the oldest dam was built in the year 1906 in Perak. And could you imagine that dam, if that dam is failed, again, right, how we mitigate that kind of risk? Sungai Perak dams, 1906. And out of 104 dams, 42 are classified as high-risk dams. Looking into their age, their structure, their functions, 42 are high-risk dams. DFI might have a look how you want to come in and fund the maintenance of those dams. Non-structural, the flood hazard map that I'm talking about, right? It gives you only a kind of a macro perspective. But we have another map that will give you a more detail until a Taman perspective, flood risk maps. So next time you want to buy a house, please get this map from the ID. That will help you to decide on your next cost of move, right? We have not come up with whether we want to give you free of charge or you have to pay maybe 10 ringgit for that maps, right?
Get it while it's free.
Yeah. And on SEPA, is of course it's important thing, and we would like to invite GLC, GLIC to join on our nation-based solution. We have a number of already GICs joining us, Petronas, UMW, Maybank, I would say. And they will adopt a stretch of river. And every week they will go to the river, clean the river, plant the trees there. We go on that. It is important for us to make sure that every drop that river that you drink is cleaned. And again, it goes back to the civil sector again, right? It goes back to the river. Non-nation-based solutions. Next, we have two systems developed by the DID. PRAP is a flood forecasting and warning system. We can warning up to 7 days in advance, forecasting 7 days, warning 2 days in advance. And you can even go to specific river to look at the river level of that particular river. Whether if you're living at the river banks, this PRAP it will help you. And when time for you to move out from the area, come October, November, and December for those in the East Coast area. NAWAP is a national water balance system that will help planners to plan looking into what we have in the river system. Whether we have to prioritize water for drinking, water for irrigation, or water for flood mitigations. That system will help you. And we have a booth out there on the NAWAP system. All right. Next one. This is about the fundings. You may have interest in this, right? Under my ministry, we have about 4 billion annual allocation for water sector. It's about 2 billion goes to flood mitigation under DIG. And they have taken a lot of programs, flood mitigation. I think that will be the big chunks go to flood mitigation. Buildings, flood pond, barn, dams, river maintenance, coastal protection, and all of this is coming from federal grant. Why federal grant? I'm not sure whether if you could figure out to make a dam project a bankable one, where ROI is positive. I don't know, right? That we want to hear from you. Come in and just maybe 10% from the 940 million budget for that, right? Water supply, we have a mixed financings. Seabase also we have mixed financing. But on the flood, is very much depending on federal grant. 100% I would say. Next. Okay. Green financing, this is area that you can come in and assist us, right? Waste to wealth. We are turning the sewage water residue into something that we could sell. Pottery, fertilizer. You can talk to IWK in that. RE, we are planning to put up a floating solar on our dams. We need huge investment there, right? We have dam in Penang Island, Mengkuang Dam, huge dam. We have built a dam in Kelau Dam in Pahang, huge dam on that. Dual purpose dam, no longer a single purpose dam. At least flood mitigation and water supply dam. Again, investment needed for that. We're talking about billion investment here. Water reclamation plants. We are planning one in Johor, where you could use the water from seawater for other purposes. cooling, I would say. NRW replacement, a big initiative by the government. We have put aside close to 2 billion for that purpose, and many more is needed to replace more than 5,000 kilometers of AC pipe buried underneath. And this, I would say, has a positive ROI. And last one, nature-based solution. We would like to invite you to join us on a river trail initiative, so that by the year 2030, we have 10,000 kilometers of trails along the rivers, where you and I could go there and jog there, cycle there. At the same time, we look after our water costs. I will stop here. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Cheng. It's very interesting. I know that I think it was 2 weeks ago that we had a small event with all the DFIs. We were actually looking at mangrove planting as part of the flood mitigation program as well. Well, a couple of months ago, I was invited to Singapore to provide a keynote speech on ESG. Somebody asked me this question, so I'm going to ask the same question to you, Tatiana, right? So that I get a different idea as well. So as economies grow, there is often an increased demand for resources and energy, especially growing countries, emerging economies, which can sometimes be at odds with climate resilience goals. How can countries, particularly in Southeast Asia or Malaysia, strike a balance between economic development and building climate resilience, ensuring that growth does not come at the expense of environmental sustainability or the other way around? Please.
I mean, I think you're kind of implying that there is a trade-off between economic development and climate resilience and sustainability.
Right.
I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think the two can go hand in hand. There are synergies. And I think there is growing evidence that that's the case. It's possible to foster a low carbon and resilient growth model towards development goals, towards the SDGs. That goes hand in hand with sustainability to resilient economies. And at the World Bank, we have, and I think we have these reports, country level reports about country climate and development reports. And the evidence in these reports is that it is possible. There is a way of that countries can develop in a friendly, sustainable, resilient way and still achieve its development goals. But there are key conditions for that to happen. One of them is policies need to be very well designed, and you need financing available. It's not a free lunch. You need strong private sector participation. The government cannot do that alone. And you need enabling conditions, the incentives for private actors, both the private sector, the financial sector, to come in and support that agenda. And you cannot forget, there will be losers. There are winners and losers in the process. So you cannot forget about the vulnerable segments, the ones that will be exposed to both the risk, the fiscal risks, like we're talking about natural disaster, but also the transition risks, the ones that will have to put bigger efforts to become more sustainable, more green. It's a challenging reform agenda, but I think there's evidence that it's doable.
Thank you on that response. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions, no, you cannot ask for questions yet, right? So we're going to wait until the end. So, Dr. Cheng, we are actually, based on your presentation, we are actually very fortunate, ladies and gentlemen, here in Malaysia, where we do not have to argue with other people on our rivers, right? The water sources are our own. I was in Kazakhstan, I was also in Egypt, where they actually depended on upstream water source, which is coming from a different country, right? So that's another geopolitical challenge in itself. So how does the NRECC prioritize and balance the allocation of resources between short-term disaster response and long-term climate resilience building, particularly in the context of flood barrier planning? In your experience, what have been the most significant challenges in coordinating climate risk mitigation efforts across various ministries, states, and local councils? I am sure that's a huge barrier right there as well that you need to overcome. And how do you envision DFIs can aid in streamlining these type of coordinations?
First, I think we have to acknowledge that water source come under state jurisdiction. Okay, they own the rivers, they own the dams. But when it comes into perspective of natural disaster, that's uncommon the federal government, right? We have given about 100 million to maintain the dams. Mainly it's flood mitigation dams. But what we are putting out there to the state is that let's share the allocation half at least. Why? They own the assets, they operate the assets. That's one thing. And at the government level, we have what we call it Water Resources Council, chaired by PM. And that council, they discuss about policy direction on water resources management, including flood mitigation, right? Budgeting, all that, right? What we see today is that the allocation for flood mitigation is represent only a fraction of what we require. For the next, now until the year 2100, we need close to about 4 billion ringgit for that. You might heard this in the report. We have gotten about 15 billion for the next 7 years. The one that already published in the newspaper, right? That we could save perhaps 4 to 5 billion. That is big projects, learning from what happened in Taman Srivoda 2 years ago, right? And state government is depending solely on government funding on flood mitigation. But again, right, if we could bring in perhaps 20% from DFI to fund flood mitigation projects that we have already spelled out in the water sector transformation 2040. By 2040, we would like to see at least 40% of private investment coming into the water sector, mainly for flood mitigation, right? If that could be realized, then we would see more dams built, flood mitigations, pond, better drainage system are constructed. But one thing I just want to let know that what we have now is a flash flood incidents in the main city like KL. That is come under the respective councils. They're the one that should maintain the drain. It's not my ministry. But fingers are pointing at us now, looking to that. Anything about flood, DID, the ministry. You can be our spokesman for that. Flash flood is under council. Talk to DBKL. They must put aside some fund for that, right? If not, your asset will be affected.
Thank you, Ruching. And of course, I think probably a discussion on insurance would need to be on this subject as well, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now almost to the end. Before I open any questions, is everybody still with me? Yes? Almost there. Right, so, we have 10 minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open the for questions from the floor. If you have any questions to our panelists, those would be a good time. Later on, if you're planning to catch them during coffee break, it's going to be very difficult because there'll be a huge line as well. So, questions from the floor. Anybody? Not yet. Any questions from the floor? Not yet. Fine, ladies and gentlemen, I will ask my question then. There you go. Right. So since you do not have any questions, I will ask my question to Ms. Tatiana. Ms. Tatiana, the banking institutions, right, with their large pool of funds, are pivotal in the financing landscape. Now, how can this banking institution be incentivized to allocate a greater portion of their portfolios toward climate resilience initiative? What role can DFIs play in de-risking such investments for their investors? Right.
Thank you. I think we went through a list of potential interventions that can support banks in this landscape. I would like to go a little bit more in detail on guarantees. I think that's an important angle that perhaps hasn't been emphasized enough. Banks, when we're talking about banks, they're the main financial institution. They're the main pinpoint if you think on vulnerable segments, along with cooperatives, MFIs, they're the ones reaching the vulnerable segments, be it MSMEs or be it the B40, for instance. So I think they have a key role to play in this landscape. And how guarantees can help. Guarantees can take the risk out of the hands of the banks. So it's a risk-sharing mechanism. Right. And for green and adaptation, so both the resilience side as well as the greening angle, there could be a link to the existing, to the developing financial infrastructure that Bank Negara is developing along with others in Malaysia. Think of taxonomies and disclosure that was discussed a lot in the first session. All these provide an enabling environment to minimize the risks for DFIs themselves in terms of taking that risk. They define what are green investments, what are adaptation investments. Adaptation is covered in the financial infrastructure in the case of Malaysia. And you are also asking banks and financial institutions to report back to you to make sense, to make sure that the funding that you're giving, the support you're giving can be tracked back. You can trace those risks. So I think that the guarantees is a way where you can monitor the whole, from leaving DFIs all the way to reaching clients and coming back. So it's a way as well to track back information. And as I mentioned, I think countries are starting to explore this for both resilience, so green windows, as well as for adaptation. So perhaps you can think here, how can that type of instruments be developed?
Fantastic. I'm gonna just ask you to continue a little bit on that question, because you're actually talking about adaptation and whatnot. Apparently, we get questions from the Slido, right? If you have any questions, you can scan the QR code and then ask questions from there. So, what role can technology and innovation play in enhancing adaptation? How can DFI support the adoption and implementation of these technologies? And if you have any, have you seen any of those cases anywhere else?
That's a hard question. I think it's a risky endeavor. I think there are many examples, and I will defer that to Rachel in the afternoon. I think she's going to come with some examples, very concrete examples on that question. I would think of, when you're thinking of innovation and technology, you need to think here, are these existing technologies? Is just such an issue about adapting it in your own case? That financing can work. Right. Can be, you don't need to expand it. Standard loans can help, and then perhaps risk-sharing mechanisms to take some of that uncertainty away, that risk away. But if you're thinking about developing technology, innovative solutions, then you may want to think about equity financing to support those investments. Those are riskier. And then you do go through an equity road where there is a more risk sharing, where the government as well, or the investor, the equity side, is getting a bit of the upside. Right.
Well, thank you. Well, so there's an incentive for you to stay all the way up till 5 p.m. today, right? And we're gonna lock the doors anyway, so you can't leave. But okay, so the next question is to Dr. Ching. I think, Dr. Ching, there's a lot of there's two questions here. When will the flood hazard map be released to public? How detailed is the data? And the other question is, in assessing and modeling climate risk, the risk map, heat map for Malaysia is required. Perhaps NRECC is underway towards making this information public. I'll leave that those two questions for you to answer, Dr. Ching.
On the flood hazard maps, we have gotten the government's approval to make them public. And I would say the earliest you could get the maps Q4, right? We are still discussing about what would be the charge like and the method of which you could get a maps. And the detail, I would say, is not as detailed as the flood risk maps. It's more on a macro area perspective. But for you, I think that is good enough. Whether you decide to buy the house in that area B, C, or D. Flood risk map is got very detailed into a streets in that particular taman or area. I think on the makings informed public, that one I totally agree with that, right? I think this is very much come under the one of the topics under the SC 2040 that we ought to make information to public, informed decisions even on a flood risk, I would say. And this, we have started that with a flood risk map, a flood hazard map first on that. And is later on, then if the flood risk map is allowed to be shared, because it has some legal implications there, right? Someone might come and sue the government if you were to release this map, then it will affect my revenue on that particular assignment or projects. Yes, I very agree on the sharing of information with the public on that.
Thank you, Doctor. This is Malaysians, right? You know, like we usually arrive late, right? So I gave you opportunity to ask questions. Now that the time is over, look at all the questions coming up, right? So asking questions also late, ka? Right? So there's a question for Tatiana, so I'll let you answer that question. Earlier you shared the rules of DFIs. I'm not going to read that in terms of to save time, right? Go ahead, Tatiana.
So yeah, the question is about examples of how DFIs can work with the private sector. For instance, one example is lines of credit with financial institutions, where, for instance, you're supporting adaptation investments by firms. Think of an SME. How can I make my business, my factory more resilient? I can adapt my factory plan, the floor plan. I can make my air conditioning, the piping, all that more resilient to flood. I can move my inventories up. That requires funding, that requires investment. So having a line of credit from banks that are specific to this, perhaps at concessional terms, so it's cheaper. That's one way, for instance, a very concrete way where DFIs can work with financial institutions to reach firms, to help them become more resilient. Again, it's on the vulnerability. You're not reducing risk. Your risk is still there. Right. You're just making yourself more resilient to those once floods happen.
Thank you on that response. And just, we're going to address only one question to Dr. Ching. What is NRECC doing to put together data to claim on the USD 1 trillion fund set by developed countries for addressing climate inequity in developing countries? By Mr. Lee King Wai from BPMB. That will be the last question, and then after that, you know, you can catch the speakers after the session.
I know there's something going on at the level, or to explain portion of the I just touch on portion on specific project on specific project, right?
Okay.
We could discuss on projects at the state and federal level, but just for your information, we have given benefits to tender some of the projects at least by 40%, and that's a big investment needed for that, right? We could come talk to CID on how they might fund some of the projects.
Thank you, Dr. Ching, on that. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's the one final round before we end the session. Just if you could, Tatiana, give just one closing remark. What would your advice be to DFIs to navigate the waters, balancing between, you know, short-term developmental needs and long-term climate change goals? Just very short, 30 seconds advice.
You're emphasizing the trade-off again. I don't think there's a trade-off. I would say, think of effectiveness. Are you reaching really the most vulnerable segments? Are you doing the best? Are your dollar making the most out of that $1? Are you being the most effective? Are you leveraging that $1 the maximum that you can? So if I need to live with one word, think of effectiveness of your interventions and how you're supporting the vulnerable in Malaysia.
Thank you, Dr. Ching. Short one.
I would encourage the DFIs to look beyond flood mitigations. Water supplies need more investment as well. Kelantan, they need 8 billion to build a new treatment plant to change the pipes. For Kelantanese, you must support this. 8 billion they need for that, right? Right. Sabah, they have presented close to 7 billion ringgit to build 2 big major dams in Sabah. DFI, could you come and just fund the dam, water supply dam? I'm not sure whether ROI is negative or positive, right? To make these 2 dams bankable. To make sure that one day you could drink water right from the tap. We need a lot of investment, changing pipes. that you could drink the tap from the tap, that your house will have 24 hours water supply every day. That, yeah? Flood mitigation, water supply, even building more water treatment plant. We had one in Langat area, 1.6 billion RM. All coming from DE, federal grant. If you could think of your portfolio on that, please do so. We are happy to talk to you on water supply, flood mitigation, and those various projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ching. Ladies and gentlemen, give our esteemed panelists a huge round of applause. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our distinguished panelists, Ms. Tatiana Didier from World Bank Group, Dr. Ching Tu Kim from the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. Your contributions have shed light and given us, invaluable knowledge, right? And we hope within the DFIs to take this back and find ways to implement them. On behalf of ADFIM, Bank Negara, as well as World Bank Group that's organizing the event today, I express my sincerest thanks to all attendees for your active participation and engagement. May we continue to work together in the spirit of unity, innovation, and responsibility for a shared environment. Ladies and gentlemen, this topic is very important, not just because of the flood, but because we need water to drink. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a very, very good morning.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give once again a big round of applause to our moderator and also panelists. Thank you so much. Could all of you please be at the center of the stage for a photo session? Thank you, Engineer Prasad, and also Dr. Ching and Ms. Titiana. Ladies and gentlemen, let us together once again try to scan the QR code right in front here for the feedback surveys for session 1 and also session 2 just now. So I'll let you around 4 minutes to complete these 2 feedback surveys. Please scan for both of the QR codes here. Ladies and gentlemen, while you are completing the surveys, I would like to invite on the stage the representative from our Green Solution exhibitors, which are from Reveal, Jabatan Pengairan dan Saliran Malaysia, and also from NG Services to be on the stage. Please welcome. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we go for our morning tea break, we will have the representative from our Green Solution exhibitors to briefly share their backgrounds and also offerings. Please.
Testing. Okay, Assalamualaikum and very good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of Bank Negara, ADFIM and also World Bank also, and fellow participants. Okay, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on this forum today. Because as we all gather here today to discuss the crucial topic of green financing, I am here to present our company which is called Reveal Sendram Berhad, which with a specific focus of decentralized water solution. Okay, in a world grappling with growing challenges of climate change and also water scarcity, our company has positioned itself to the forefront of innovation, where we understand that water is it's not just a vital resource, but also also a finite one, and it is our mission to find better ways to accelerate access to this precious resource at affordable cost. Today, I would like to introduce to you guys our key offering, which is the technology called atmospheric water generator. In brief, this technology converts and extract the humidity in the air into safe, clean drinking water. By harnessing the power of humidity, we can provide a decentralized and sustainable solution. To give you a better context, this is one of our recent projects deployed in Sabah, and then it is actually an off-grid drinking water station for a living quarters inside a remote palm oil estate. Okay, prior to this, the residents there, solely relied on untreated rainwater and also plastic bottle drinking water, where they buy from the city and then they bring in. But after this project, we are glad to share that the project has benefited, over 350 people daily with safe, clean drinking water. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, a water technology company like us, I think, presents a compelling opportunity to banking sectors for green financing, at the same time promoting sustainable solutions. Now I invite each and every one of you to visit our booth just outside of the hall, where you can witness by yourself of the AWG in action live, and also at the same time you can experience the taste of drinking water, which is derived straight from the air. Yeah. At the same time, our team also will be available to answer any of your questions, and also will provide you to more insights into the technology itself and also the other potential application. So thank you for your attention, and looking forward to meeting you guys outside. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Reveal Sendram Berhad. Next up, I would like to invite representative from Jabatan Pengairan dan Saliran Malaysia. Please welcome.
Oh, sorry. Very good morning. All right. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I am Fazli from Department of Regulation and Drainage, from Agency of National Flood Forecasting and Warning Center. Okay, I would like to share to all of you about our programs. So from now, we are trying to do one big program. It's a National Flood Forecasting and Warning Program. This for all Peninsula and Sabah and Sarawak, covered all areas in Semenanjung and Sabah and Sarawak. There are two main objectives of our program: to do a flood forecasting 7 days ahead and give warning 2 days ahead. So with this objective, we can reduce the cost of damage about the flood and give more time to evacuate agencies and especially NATMA and the team to do more preparation and how to make a good adequate plan. And then we also developed almost 1,500 stations all over Indonesia, including the rainfall station and also water level station, which is it can give us real-time data. You can surfing on our web is public info banjir, www.publicinfobanjir.gov.my. They give us the real-time data, and we can monitor surrounding area, which is you can monitor river level in the particular area or whole Malaysia, including Sabah and Sarawak, in the real-time data. And in that website also, we give us a warning 2 days ahead which areas will occur of a flood event. All right, that's why I'm here. I try to promote what our doing under this program, and we are invited, all of you, to come to our booth outside the hall, and you can also download the application on your mobile apps, which is we already to give all the civilians and all the netizens the goods apps that you can monitor on your own. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, representative from Jabatan Perairan dan Saliran Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, before we going for our morning tea break, let us hear the last but not least presentation and also pitching of the offerings from NG Services. Please welcome.
So hi, my name is Kevin. I head up business development for NG in Malaysia. NG is a utility company, French-based. We've been in Malaysia since 2012. We own district cooling plant. We own a large-scale solar farm. We're active in the energy efficiency and renewable energy field with multiple assets deployed. We are investors in the country. We take very long-term positions, working with companies, helping them improve the efficiency, getting them to reach net zero, carbon neutral goals that they have internally. And we are essentially not equipment maker. We don't make equipment. We are more of a service provider. So we are product agnostic, and you'll learn more at our booth. And essentially, that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let us have our quick morning tea break for like 50 minutes. And refreshments are provided outside of this auditorium. And you can also enjoy the food at the conference hall too, while having the tour at the booth. And also we shall resume our third session with another interesting topic at 11:25. So thank you. Please enjoy your refreshment. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you have enjoyed your refreshments and have had a chance to tour at the booth for the mini Green Solutions exhibition. Ladies and gentlemen, in this third session, we will pay a closer look to the relationship between green finance and businesses, which are the engine of economic growth and development. Our esteemed panel will delve into the topic of mobilizing sustainable finance for greening of business value chains. The panelists will provide a fresh perspective on the challenges that SMEs face when adopting sustainable practices, offering illuminating insights to enhance incentive and support for Malaysians SMEs. Ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome on the stage the panelists for our third session, Mr. Max Lee, Chief Executive Officer of Pantas Software, Encik Ikhwan Muhzani Muhammad, Chief Executive Officer of M-Bank Islamic, and Datin Eloise C, Managing Director of Kahong Precision Tooling. The moderator for this session, none other, Dr. Hamim Shahrum Ahmad Mokhtar, Deputy Director of the Financial Inclusion Department, Bank Negara Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce a bit of our speaker, Mr. Max Lee, CEO and co-founder of Pantas, a leading climate technology provider in Southeast Asia, drives sustainable business practices and innovations. He spearheaded the Greening Value Chain program in collaboration with Bank Negara Malaysia, following previous successful ventures in big data analytics and investment banking. Our second speaker, Mr. Ekwan Mozani, he is CEO of M-Bank Islamic. Berhad has been leading the group sustainability department as the group sustainability champion since 2019. With a strong academic background in economics from the University of Cambridge, Ekwan chaired the working group that developed sectoral guides for palm oil, renewable energy, and energy efficiency sectors. Datin Eloise C., the Managing Director of Kahong Precision Tooling Sdn Bhd, having joined the family business in 2003 after completing her bachelor degree in marketing and business management, with an MBA from the University of Victoria, Australia in 2010. She has successfully led the company's finance and human resource departments before assuming her current role as Managing Director in 2017, contributing to KHPT's notable achievements and accolades. Dr. Hamim Sharum, our moderator, is the Deputy Director in Financial Inclusion Department at Bank Negara Malaysia, where he leads and guides the strategic development policies of social finance, microfinance, and green finance. With a background in accounting, an MBA and PhD in Islamic banking and finance, he has published and presented several papers at domestic and international conferences and has previous experience in various departments within Bank Negara. Without any further ado, Dr. Hamim, the stage is now yours.
Thanks, Amir. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. So let me start with a statistic about SMEs related to ESGs. Based on the recent survey conducted on SMEs in Malaysia by this UN Global Compact, SME corporations as well as Alliance Bank, it shows that 60% of those SME believe that adopting ESG or sustainability will create a long-term value and also increase their business opportunities. But, however, only 1 out of 4, to be specific, 28% of them are currently adopting those ESG or green practices. So given that, this session will discuss about how we can mobilize this sustainable finance or blended finance in greening the business value chains, drawing upon our recent pilot program of JVC, Greening Value Chain Program, which is a collaborative effort among all the partners. So we have 3 panelists here. The way that I will conduct this session is by way of, we'll first have a sharing session by all the 3 panelists, and then I'll open to the floors for the Q&A. You can either use your mic or Slidos, and then we have a final say from each of the panelists. Okay, let's start with this Max Lee. So Max, could you tell us about this GVC as well as how Pantas, which is a tool for measuring the carbon, helps assist SME adopting green? Max?
Okay, thank you, Doc. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to stand up. I think we need a little bit more energy here. So thank you for the opportunity to present about this Greening Value Chain program. We're very excited to be able to partner with Bank Negara to launch this to help the SME to go green. And before we go further, I'll just have a slide to share to set the stage of why, well, I shouldn't say why, how sustainability, how carbon reporting actually affect the SME and how we are mobilizing sustainable finance via technology. So I'm going to talk about the 3 hows. So the first how is how does carbon tracking impact the supply chain? The second how is how do regulation compel company in the supply chain to decarbonize, to go green? And then lastly, how the Bank Negara Malaysia's Greening Value Chain program works and some of the learnings that we have gotten since we kick off the program in March this year. And also, excitingly, we are launching this in other countries as well with collaboration with, for example, Bank of Thailand, SEC of Thailand, to launch it in Thailand and also to launch the similar program in Indonesia as well. Okay, so to set the stage, I know it looks very complicated, but this chart is important to explain how the carbon reporting impact SMEs. So a lot of people say, I'm not exporting, I'm SME, I don't export, why do I care? Or I care about climate, but I do care about a lot of other stuff. For example, how do I pay my staff next month? So how does this impact SME? So this sets the stage. So this slide shows how carbon accounting works. So carbon accounting is divided into 3 scopes. Without going into detail, the first scope is basically the direct emission from the company's operation, the factories, the machines, the cars, the fleet. The second is electricity. So those are easy to understand. But the problem is the hardest part to calculate and to track, it is what we call the indirect emission or the supply chain emission. So there are 15 categories, not going to go into details, but 4 the highlighted categories are example of key source of emission from supply chain. And this is how the SME get caught in all these climate regulations. So purchase goods and services, capital goods, upstream transportation and distribution. So those are basically emissions that's contributed by the company's vendors and suppliers. And lastly, the one in blue is basically what finance emission is all about, is what you, as banks, mostly banks here, you need to calculate the emissions of your borrower and include it under the category 15 finance admission. Okay, so it looks complicated, but if I can summarize in one sentence, it's basically if you're a company, you sell a service, you sell a product to somebody, you are somebody's scope 3. As simple as that. So if you're SME, I sell to somebody that export to Europe, I am contributing to their scope 3. So why does scope 3, how scope 3 impact all this? So the first thing that comes in mind is tax. So EU introduced this carbon border adjustment mechanism, or more well known as EU carbon border tax. Essentially is if you export to Europe starting in 2026, you have to pay tax based on the carbon content of your product. And it covers scope 3. So that's the first thing. So as an SME, you do not need to export to Europe to be impacted. You just need to sell to somebody that export to Europe to be impacted. Reporting starts in October this year, covering a few industry, but it will eventually cover most of the industry that Malaysia or Southeast Asia company are active in. And then the second thing is we have all these reporting requirements, alphabet soup. We are just listing a few, but there are more. So European have this corporate sustainability reporting directive that covers scope 3. Under ISSB standard, under the International Financial Reporting Standards that will be implemented in January next year, company need to report their scope 3. And you have company, and some company in Malaysia have pledged to go net zero under the Science-Based Target Initiative. They not only need to report scope 1, 2, and 3, but they have to manage it and reduce it. So how do you really manage and reduce your scope 3? It's not even yours to begin with. So we will show one of the methods that we're piloting with Bank Negara, the greening value chain, to see how we can operationalize this and then combine it with finance, sustainable finance to make it work. And of course, you have organizations like CDP, etc. And lastly, for the banks here, I think Bank Negara, not just Bank Negara, but regulators around the world are asking banks to start reporting their finance emission. So it's basically your borrower's emission need to be accounted for under your scope 3 category 15. Okay, so greening value chain program. It was announced during COP last year. The basic idea is to help Malaysian SME in implementing long-term change to green their operation. So key highlight of the program. So, and it's firstly, it's free for the SME. and it's free, and it's also not financed by Bank Negara. We managed to find alternate source to finance this program. So SME gets a simplified carbon accounting software designed for them, where they're able to calculate and track their carbon emission. The second thing is capacity building and technical advisory. So they get to understand how all this thing works, what is carbon counting, how it really impacts me, and why I should do it before I lose business or before I'm able to sell to more people. And then the third thing is, of course, after you calculate, we have partnership with, we call it decarbonization partner, but basically solution provider that help company to reduce their carbon emission. For example, solar, for example, waste management, for example, energy efficiency solution providers. And of course, lastly, where do you finance all this stuff after you, even if you want to go green? And that's where we are glad to sign up partner like mBank, work very closely with them on LCTF, low carbon transition facility by Bank Negara, and also sustainability linked loans. And of course, all this need to be powered by data, need to be monitored, and that's where the software solutions comes in. And to make it, well, to go a little bit more detail, this is my last slides, so that I can give enough time for Q&A. So the way it starts is we work with a large corporation that need to export. So our first cohort was Kosan. Kosan is one of the world's largest glove manufacturer. So we work with them because they have been requested. They sold majority of product to Europe. They have been requested by the European clients about how do you measure, not just measure, but how you measure and track your supply chain emission. We're not satisfying with just reporting. We want to know how you really reduce your emission and through your supply chain. So with that, we get them on board. We engage with their supplier. About 400 of their SME suppliers were introduced to this program. And then through this program, we get them on training. So they get training from our partner like MGTC, ESE Book, and also BSI. BSI is a British Standard Institution that provides certification on some of this reporting, etc., under the ISO standard. And like I mentioned, decarbonization partner. After you report, the software will suggest ways to reduce your carbon emission. So partner like SafeTrot, it's a fleet management company, can help them reduce their fuel consumption by up to 50%. Guardian, waste management company. So instead of going to landfill, there are better ways to treat your waste. And Gentayu is a renewable energy company who is our partner. But we are constantly looking out for more partners and different partners across the region to help not just the SME, but large enterprise to decarbonize as well. And lastly, like I said, money talks. So we need financing. So we go with mBank, which is our partner from the start with the GVC program. And as for all this, the most important factors is actually the company, the anchor company, because they need to persuade their supply chain to do it. And so far, we're seeing some company, or at least large MNC, they're saying, if you cannot do this, we will cut you off from our supply chain. But we don't want that. We want a just transition for all the SME. That's why we created this program. For Kosan, they're telling their supplier, if you do this, we will buy more from you, we'll make you our preferred supplier. So Kosan is the first one. We have another company joining, a large company, exporter, joining this program month end, well, I guess in next week. And we have, and we're looking for more companies to join this to help the SME to go green. I stop here, and then I'll let our other panelists share their knowledge. And then if you have any question, well, you can ask during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. Certainly more partners are needed to join this GVC, including the DFIs. And the GVC program itself is indeed a blended financing, comprising, like Max said just now, a training program, software to measure the tool, and also funding. Talking about funding, Ikhwan, could you share with us in terms of MBank response to this climate change and also your experience in participation in this GVC? Thanks, Ikhwan.
Thank you, Dr. Hamim, our moderator. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning, of course, to our moderator, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Since my first panelist has actually stood up, so inevitably I need to stand as well. But for me, it's because when I speak and I sit, I actually fall asleep. So it's good that, I stand, so it gives me a bit more energy as well. So this morning, from MBank, we'll be touching on two topics. One is about how we are looking to address the real impact of climate risks on financial institutions. And then secondly is to provide a bit more color and to supplement what Max has presented in relation to our participation and role in the Greening the Value Chain program. Now, I'm going to make a very obvious statement, and that is climate change is real. There are even discerning people who believe it is a Western conspiracy. But for me personally, those who have that opinion is actually in La La Land. Okay? It is actually real. We can see it through the irregular floods that's happening in some geographical locations where floods don't really occur. Now, for financial institutions, we take the view that it will impact us financially. So, intuitively, when you think about it, when your customers are actually impacted, for example, by floods, they have their operations adversely impacted. They have got no revenue because they can't sell products, because they can't produce products, then surely it will impact their repayment capabilities. So that in turn will turn to an impaired account. So it is a real phenomenon. So for banks, we are amongst others guided by the new policy document issued by our central bank, which is called the Policy Document on Climate Risk Management and Scenario Analysis. So just allow me to provide you an overview of some of the key aspects which should be looked at by financial institutions. So this is, I wish to share some of our experiences. Now, there are actually four pillars that we should be looking at. The first is on the governance. Then secondly is strategy. Then risk management, and last but not least is actually your customers. Yes, you cannot be doing things with an introvert perspective. It is really the customers that ultimately you wish to serve. And underpinning those are actually capacity building to board members, to senior management, and to your staff, and even your customers as well. So the SMEs are also an important part of the capacity building efforts. And then last but not least, if things are not tracked, they're not monitored, then it's not going to get done. So for banks, we need to disclose certain targets and metrics as per the Bank Negara JC3 implementation guide. And also if you're a listed company, the Bursa requirements as well. Now, the overarching document is really the recommendations by the TCFD, right? The Task Force on Finance Climate Related Disclosure. So very quickly, in terms of governance, so I think the most important part is to be very clear who in your organization is responsible for what. I mean, obviously we say it's the board subcommittees, management. So honestly, even in MBank, we got a bit confused. So that's why you have the CEO of the Islamic Bank driving the climate risk management aspect. Okay, because it's actually an orphan. So people were scared. It's like a an untouched bomb. So it landed on my lap. So we're still very confused. So more importantly is, that aside, is you need to be very clear in terms of the job description and also the terms of reference for board members, for example. Okay, then of course the internal controls, and I'll give you a bit more color at the subsequent slide. Then strategy, because sustainability actually means different things to different people. People still believe that sustainability and ESG are the same, and it's not. Okay, so that's a different topic. So it's important that as a start, you set your framework. So in MBank, we have got our group sustainability framework, which actually borders up the areas that we want to focus on. Okay? And then, whatever strategy that you decide to pursue need to be aligned to your scenario analysis. Then, of course, risk management, which is the most difficult part, because now it's no longer for you to narrate in a qualitative manner. You need to quantify. So you need to quantify the impact of climate risk on your credit risk, liquidity risk, market risk, operational risk. You need to quantify. Yeah. So, for example, if you ask me how you measure liquidity risk, is through your LCR or NSFR. So, how does climate risk impact LCR and NSFR? How do you monitor risk? For example, your PV01 or your annual loss limits. So, how does climate risk impact these risk indicators? Operational risk. So, in MBank, we use a basic indicator approach. How does that impact our BIA? Okay. We also have to conduct scenario analysis with the next 30, 40 years. And then another one is doing the climate stress test 2024. And of course, customers, which is very important. So we need to come up with products. I'll touch a bit more on that one. And then how do we actually embed ESG into our T&C? And, this is again part of our efforts to create awareness and knowledge sessions for our customers. Okay. So very quickly, this is an example of the governance structure. So you got the board at the top. We set our risk management committee, and we also have a group sustainability and climate risk council. So this is the major forum on which the senior management deliberates and make decisions in relation to sustainability or climate risk. And at the working level, we have got embedded functions, because there is no point only those at the top that advocate sustainability or understands climate risk. It must be the entire organization. And then, of course, you must make sure that the first line, second line, and third line of defense are also equipped with the right tools, and they're very clear of their roles in this endeavor. So MBank has also introduced what we call exclusion list from 2021. So these are companies or sectors where we do not provide new, additional, or refinancing. Existing exposure will just grandfather. Now, a point of interest would be this coal. So from 2023, MBank no longer provides new, additional, or refinance, where coal contributes at least 20% of the counterparty's revenue or 20% of the counterparty's cost of production. Now, you may ask me, why 20%? Because I come from the Islamic Bank, so Securities Commission Malaysia has a 20% threshold for mixed business. So that's where we got the 20% from. Okay. But of course, we're also mindful of energy security, so we do give exemptions where it's for national energy policy requirements. Then I also want to share with you, especially our SME friends here, that currently, traditionally, banks, when you assess, we will assess from a credit risk perspective. In other words, we look at your repayment risk. Can you pay me back or not? So it's really very much financially driven evaluation. So now we overlay credit risk grade with ESG risk grade, low, medium, high, and acceptable. We overlay with the climate change classification, and we also class whether that particular loan financing is green or not green. Yeah. So that's why you will see we've got two streams. One is the credit risk assessment. So that's fairly straightforward. So now we're overlaying with the climate change and ESG risk assessment. So ultimately, we will assign between C1 to C5 as per the climate change and principles taxonomy classification, and the ESG risk grade, which is actually an MBank internal infrastructure. So then the big question is, so what? So what if a customer is assigned a C5? So what is a customer is assigned a high ESG risk grade? So what? Actually, the answer now is actually nothing. Yeah? Not yet. So we are also reluctant. We don't be a leader, but nanti kan we're the only one doing it. That customers go to another bank. Yeah. So the industry has to be shackled together. Yeah. We must be here together. Yeah. I mean that's commercial reality lah. But so that's why I say mana illustrative only. So but we're moving towards that direction. So the intent is, but now we're slowly doing it. So if you assign a medium risk grade or high ESG risk grade, then there must be some narrative on mitigation plan or remedial plan. But we don't really enforce it, but it's just to get the awareness going. So then the impact really, will it eventually impact pricing, tenure, covenants, event of default, will exit the customer? That is in the next stage. Okay. So then I also want to share with you some of the green products which are available out there. So, there are sustainability linked products. Okay, so in essence, as a bank, you should agree predetermined KPI should be aligned to the sustainability linked loan principles. And then you also got the green products, to finance solar, green vehicles, green mortgages. Capital markets, these are the green-oriented capital markets instruments. And some of the schemes, I think Max mentioned about the LCTF, and there's also GTFS, and this is where I'll touch a bit more. So that is, our sharing of the journey that we have actually started about 3 years ago, and we need to elevate ourselves so that there's a real impact to ourselves and ultimately for the betterment of everybody. Now, on the GVC program, so Max has given you the introduction, so I'm not going to repeat what he has said, but it's really about sharing you the perspective of a financial institution, that the role that we play. So we signed the MOU with Pantas in March this year. And so obviously as a bank, our role is to actually provide the financing. Okay. So currently we've got Kosan, which is the anchor, and it's got its SMEs. So of course, we are there to support Kosan SMEs who are on the value chain to transition to low carbon practices. Okay. Now we are also getting our SME customers to be using the Pantas software. Okay. So we've actually have got training programs working with Pantas, and also Bank Negara has been benevolent to provide some of the infrastructure and premises. So the syllabus, actually you can see there, reporting, carbon accounting, GAG emissions, the assurance process, and of course mBank solutions for greening yourself. Yeah. So that's why you will see here that you got the Bank Negara and Pantas pioneering this very innovative idea. So for us as a bank, and in mBank, SME is our target focus. So we feel that it fits nicely with our strategic direction. So henceforth, as part of the capacity building, and then the software is extremely. I've actually personally given a demonstration by Max, so I feel it's rather intuitive. But I don't know whether Max only showed me the easy bits lah. So that's why we okayed it. Oh, okay. Maybe I should take a look. Yeah. So for so then this is the LCTF, right? So the low carbon transition facility. Dr. Hamid mentioned is actually a blended facility. You can use it for capex, working capital, not for refinancing. Now one of the requirements of LCTF is about reporting. So you need to have a baseline. For example, what is your GAG emission or electricity consumption? Then after a certain period, I think, yeah, so we need to report to Bank Negara annually, and SME customers who actually procure the LCTF need to report to us on the progress. So I want to touch a bit on Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So for banks, at least in mBank, we are currently reporting our Scope 1 and Scope 2. For Scope 3, we only report up to the our staff emission level, but not financed emission. But that is the greatest challenge. So our customer Scope 1 and Scope 2 are actually our Scope 3. Okay. So the thinking is by getting our SME customers to use the Pantas software as an example, then they would, if I recall correctly, they would input information which are readily available, okay, electricity bill, the fuel that they use. Then the software will then actually churn out the GAG emission. So now we're also talking whether there's an API connectivity so that there's no manual intervention required. So which means if you're an SME customer, then you do it mBank, you fill up the Pantas software, then it churns out the GAG emission for you, your Scope 1, Scope 2, and then it will automatically feed into our reporting system so we can disclose our Scope 3. Timeline for your information. As a listed entity and as financial institution, we're bound by two things. One is Bursa Malaysia requirement. So for us, our end is March. By end of March 2024, we have to report what Bursa calls the common sensitivity matters. But subsequent to that, then we have to start by 2026 complying with TCFD recommendations and super full compliance 2028. Concurrently, we are in need to comply with the JC3 requirement. So it's given 18 months. So at least the basic recommendations. So that's quite manageable. But then the stretch, the Emerging Guide doesn't give a timeline. But as a listed entity, we're still bound by the Bursa requirement. So this is a key message to all our SME friends because we need to disclose your scope 1 and scope 2 because we need to disclose our own scope 3. Okay. So with that, I conclude my presentation and I'll pass back to Dr. Hamid.
Thanks a lot. Quite interesting sharing, especially on those, I call it traffic light on your credit process. Thanks for sharing about enlightening us on SCTFs too. So next we have this Datin Lois to share about your experience, including your challenges as well as your wish list to advise. Thanks.
Yeah. This still good afternoon, everyone. So it's nice to be here, and I feel a bit awkward here because whoever I meet is mostly the banker. So after hearing the session on the morning and also these two gentlemen speech, I feel very stressed as a SME. Yeah, I believe that SME know is going to come, but is waiting who are the first. That is how our mindset is. Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit about how in SME views to drive our mindset and our commitment to benefit us in terms of sustainability and resilience, and also our stakeholder expectation and the common challenges that we are facing, and what are the support that for the SME to overcome the challenges. And of course, we hope that we can join the journey together with everyone to embrace the sustainability. So how do we drive our sustainability and resilience? I think for the business-wise, we need a sustainable business. And that is a pull factor for us to acknowledge that market demand is the things that we need to consider to doing the business. Because more and more people are preferred to buying goods from the company that doing something that is environmental friendly, so that we can increase the market share and the sales on this. And of course, cost saving is one of the things, like if the things is involving reducing the energy consumption, minimize the waste, and optimize our resource usage, it will generate a significant cost saving for us and to benefit to the consumer. For the competitive advantage, of course, as a company that is very responsible to the environment, I believe that our reputation will be better and it provide a good portfolio for us to compete with other competitors. And also access to the financing and finding opportunities, like what we see now. I believe more and more bankers will apply the T&C to our loan. So I believe that's one thing that we need to really focus on. How are we going to get this access? And how is the support from the banker? And regulatory compliances, like what you be mentioned, if we feel to, causing the environmental harm from the factory, we can get a very serious fine and penalty on this. So we have to be very careful on managing our waste and also reduce our carbon emissions in the future. So what is the push factor? Of course, the rising costs. As you know, if your factory is big, you have a very high energy consumption, and also you have a very high waste disposal fee that you are using some oil to run your machinery, and then you have a lot of water need to be, purified in the way. And also, I think another thing is the reputation and the risk management for the SME is a good reputation for us. If we are able to commit on what we need to do for the ESG, and also employee engagement and retention. I believe that nowadays our team is younger generations, and they actually they very much love the environment being taken care of. So in order to have this policy in our company, and also we are doing it, I believe we can engage more employee and retention more talent in our company. So when you see all this pull and push factor, basically in summary is we SME, we need to find a good reason for us why we doing this. Yeah, not only to benefit as a overall, but it also will give a good impact to our company in terms of efficiency and cost saving. And just to let you know, for my company, I'm actually is in the automotive industry, and I'm supply the parts for the OEM auto part makers. So we are in an ecosystem. The whole supply chain is pretty much depending on each other. So just to give you an example, on the 2021, actually we have my customer is being affected by the flood. And in the whole supply chain, all the vendors are putting together and to really helping that company to overcome the short supply. So what I'm trying to bring up the story here, because try to imagine that if the situation is not being handled well, you can have more than maybe 600 vendors have no part to supply. Means they have no money at all because due to one of the vendor being affected and causing one car cannot be sold and stop production. So the impact is huge, and as a vendor in this ecosystem supply chain, we also worry that what if that company cannot recover, then how we going to cover our risk by losing the income during that period? Yeah. So I believe that it's very important to the bank to really come out something on the emergency loan in all this, unforeseeable situation. Okay, in order to say the motivating factor, this one actually I would like to talk about more like the Anchor company. So I am one of the vendor for the overall the supply chain. So the OEM car maker is very important motivating factor for us to how to join this greening business value chain. For example, for me, I actually, the Anchor company of my customer, they actually will guide us like a mentor-mentee programs. Then in this one is for the safety, like join together with the Dodge. So we hope that the Anchor company can, to have a policy to guide the vendor to develop into a greener journey, so that the whole supply chain can be optimized and our risk can be managed. And also, of course, we open up our innovation and market opportunity in a way. Yeah. Okay. So what is our common challenges? I believe in SME, we always having a financial constraints and also human resource constraints. It means if I want to adopt a new like policy in green, you have to have more money and you have to have more human in doing this. And also we are very lacking of the expertise and the knowledge. So we don't have a very good awareness about this green and also ESG concept. So it's very hard to, drive the whole company to understand what this is about. And also we don't have the expertise to tell us what to do. And engaging expertise is another thing that we say is a cost for us. And another thing is the access to financing. So difficulty on obtaining the affordable financing for green initiative. In this one, I think when we want to access to financing, I believe that it's a very common that people will approach me is doing the solar. So that is the only green financing I know at the moment. So I'm not really sure is there any green initiative is having in the market right now. And also it's very time and cost consuming also because we've been thinking about how complication on the records and how we maintain the green practice regularly, which I think Pantas mentioned that in order to report the carbon emission, so how to calculate, we totally have no ideas. And resistant to change. This is a culture for SME. It maybe have a challenge because when you want to do something, it always about modify your processes. It always will be about you need to change your mindset, and it always will be a top-down and down-top things. So the communication on how to get your team to buy in is a challenge. So how to overcome all these challenge? Of course, we hope that to get the financial incentive and grant to fund the project, especially mostly the upfront cost is very high. And also we need a technical assistance and capacity building, means we really need to understand what is this all about, and also the compliances that we need to comply, and also what are the impact if we're not doing that. So the training and the guidance we need from the government, I believe, and also from bank also. And also how to access to affordable financing. So like what I say, I can only think of one, which is only solar, but I believe many SMEs not really in big factory need the solar, you see. So what are the other financing options? Like just now, M-Bank saying it's like ESG linked loan or whatever. Beside the buildings and etc., the facility, the equipment, is there anything finance that we can access? Yeah. And also the simplicity of the reporting and compliances, like what and how we need to keep track. And we hope it can keep as simple it is, not a very manual and then a lot of paper keeping things for us to do. So as a conclusion, I feel that SME and company, especially the large corporation, if they are your customer, I strongly recommend you can push them so that they can push SME. Because I joined quite some program with my anchor company, which is my customer, the large corporation. I just give an example that is a program launched by Dodge JKKP program, which this program is a mentor-mentee program to guide the SME. It's a three-party, the customer, DOSH, and also SME like me, so that we join this program together, and they choose 1 year around 3 vendors to enhance their safety compliances. So I think it's a very good activities, because vendor will feel that they need to do something to continue the business, and also to bring up the reputation that, you know, this vendor is very committed to the program. So I believe in the SNG, the ESG, I believe that it can also, you know, do something like this to encourage large corporation kickstart some vendor development program, so that they can give more knowledge to the SME. And of course, policy advocacy and support. This one is from the government. Yep. So in government, we don't know who to look for. Sorry. the thing is, for today, we know the bank, but we don't know is there any government agency is involving also, so that we can have more knowledge on this. And also, of course, monitoring and evaluation support, especially from how to track, how to record, and make this can be sustained, not like, you know, report 1 month, then 3 months, no reports. You know, the consistency must be there. And how to overcome our challenges. In SME, we doing business, of course, we want to find out anything that can benefit us, then we do. So in terms of finance, or in terms of increasing our efficiency, but when you talk about increasing our efficiency, it definitely is a cost involved. So we can't run out of need the money to participate into greener future. So yeah. So that is my presentation, and thank you. And I would like to put a quote that saying sustainability is no longer that doing less harm, but it's about doing more good, so that as a company, as a MD, I have to bring this message to all my team and my colleague, my employee, to understand what is all this sustainability, what is all these green practices. So for bank, I strongly recommend when you're approaching the finance to the company, please get involved by the person that make decision, like MD, the boss of the company. I believe it can get better result and understanding from there. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Really entertaining. We now move to the Q&A sessions. You can either ask through the mic or through this Slido. Oh, there are 3 questions already. First question, Max.
Okay. So the question is, how can we see more large corporates facilitate and incentivize their supplier to the adoption of sustainable practice? I think based on what we have done so far, the learning, I think 3 strategy when it comes to this. So we all know that large corporation has substantial sway on their supply chain. So we encourage large corporation to not just shout about their own ESG progress. Yes, we are going green, we are going net zero, and all this stuff are great, but to go net zero, they need to understand you have scope 3, which where 80% of your emission lies. So helping your supplier go green is part of ESG, and is part to go green anyway. So I think most corporations are very focused right now on their own reporting, but are not yet taking into account the supply chain. So first, I think leading by example. And what do I mean by that? they can if they show that they are using, they have a system, they have a solution to track their own emission, etc., and share that practice with their supplier, it's an easier sell. If you are doing it manually or doing Excel and it's like, hey guys, I need you all to report as well, go do it yourself. We actually seen situation like that. Large companies like our foreign buyers asking us to report our scope 3. So here's a form, please fill it out SME and then send it to us. And if not, we might not buy from you. And it's it's hard. You can't, if yourself are not leading, for example, and you're asking people to do it, I think that's it's not gonna work. And the second thing is, I think, transparency and effective communication. So take Kosan, for example. They actually communicated actively, and we are trying to make it even more transparent so that they can share the emission data they collect from their supplier and say, okay, this is the benchmark. This is how our suppliers are doing when it comes to emission, and some of the stuff that they can do to reduce their emission. And lastly, provide effective tool and capacity building. That's why we think the greening value chain is a great program, because the issue that Datin mentioned earlier, it can be solved through the GVC program. So the tools, the free tools, the free capacity building, education, etc. And I think another proof point is we are getting interest from Thailand and Indonesia to launch GVC there as well, because they see this as a need not just for Malaysian company but across the region. And the fact that we are not in more countries is because we are a small Malaysian startup and we just do not have enough people to operationalize this. But Malaysia is, well, of course, being Malaysian, of course, we are focusing more on Malaysia right now, and we really do want to help. Thank you.
Nothing. Question about how does the transition to a GVC usually impact positive or negative to your company's operations profits?
Okay, so regarding to this, I actually like just now I give an example of the solar. So it's just like a solar. This is the thing that to give us that if you install the solar, you can save your electrical consumption. So, but for me, I've been thinking, this is the only options that we can do greener. So what me and my team do is we got a study, and we actually, because we are a stamping company, so we are doing for the machine. We have a lot of machine. So what we do is we try to upgrade some of the component of the machines so that it can reduce the energy consumptions and also it can be, I think, it save 50% of the electrical consumptions, and also we can we can having a lower cost in order to stay competitiveness with our price when we quote to our customer. So that is the things that not only we are reducing, we are doing in a greener way, and also we reduce the carbon emission. So that is how it can impact my operation and also my performance in terms of pricing competitiveness, and also of course the stakeholder or of my customer or my investor or any of my employees. Yeah, so that is how we are doing this, to trying to see what we can do in the most practical way, and also the most optimizing way on using our resources, not only in the solar, so but in consideration on our machinery capacity and capability in doing that. Yeah.
Okay, we have a final one. Can we have a combo 3-in-1 like a Milo? There are 3 questions there combined together. One is about how Islamic ensure no greenwashing. second is how have you heard the challenges from SME? How can mBank help SME like Datin? And the third one is, does mBank apply those policies to all, regardless?
Sure. So firstly on greenwashing. Greenwashing is a fancy term of telling the untruth. Okay? Now, for me, this is no different from how we conduct our business as part of the ordinary course of business. So if you put aside the green aspect, right, as a financial institution, when we actually provide funding, then we need to assess the customer, right? So the financials, for example, so we rely on audited accounts. When we do, say, property financing, there's a valuation report, for example. So which means there's reliance on third-party independent assurance. Now you move on to the next stage, and then you overlay this with green. So this is also no different. So where customers make certain disclosures, so we would require corroborative evidence from the customer. So until and unless we are satisfied with the information, then we're not able to move on to the next stage. Now, more importantly is as part of, say, the LCTF, which requires us to report to the central bank, which is the fund provider on an annual basis, is the GHG emission. So this is where I think we're still getting clarity from Pantas. To what extent, because it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So when customers input information into the Pantas software, then if they input information which is the untruth, then surely the GHG emission will also be incorrect. So this is where, for example, we may, when customers input information such as their electricity bill or their consumption of petrol, so the bank will then would require you to show your audited accounts, for example, that this is actually the cost that you incur insofar as electricity bill is concerned. Then I also want to extend the conversation on the fact that the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board, is coming up with its sustainability standards. So at some point in time, I don't know when, all organizations will need to comply with these standards. And for the standards application to be credible, then third-party evaluation validation will come on board as well. So inevitably, there will be costs. But, you know, for us to do good, inevitably, we have to consider this as an investment. So that's the first point. Second point is about how can mBank assist customers, SMEs such as Datin. So in mBank, one of our genuine key focus is SME. So we've seen tremendous growth for the past 5 or 6 years. As a financial institution, of course, we provide the financing, but mBank also adopts a philosophy called beyond financing, which is also in line with our value-based intimidation, where we wish to add value to our customers. So our beyond financing philosophy is underpinned by, for example, we have a program called the mBank Biz Club. So if you're an SME and you are up, but the main condition is you need to be an mBank customer lah. Yeah. So if you're an SME, you're an mBank customer, so you can partake in the mBank Biz Club, which is a network forum. We've been doing it for 5-6 years. So we invite industry leaders in various fields to actually partake, and so for you to gain knowledge and actually network. Secondly, we also have what we call our business pitching competition, which is called the mBank Biz Race. We're now into season 4. So if I'm right, we're looking at green as a topic. So when you participate, it is not just you submitting your business plan. We actually provide training by reputable companies so that you are able to uplift yourself in terms of knowledge and submit credible business plan. And if you do win, there are attractive prizes. We even take you to foreign countries where you can actually learn some of this best practices. Okay, so the beyond financing, the thing is something that I think SMEs should be aware of. So please, you can approach us, and then you can participate in all our beyond financing programs. So funding will always remain funding. I want to caution that ultimately, credit, your ability to pay back is sacrosanct. You can be the greenest SMEs in the world. You can. My former head of credit risk is here. So she's now a board member of another organization. So ultimately, credit is still key. You cannot pay back the loan. You can be green. To the cow come home, we won't give you the financing. So your credit capability must be there, your payment capability must be there. But we also have other facilities that can offer. It's actually beyond solar. So, but please bear in mind our beyond financing philosophy. So the third question is on about applicability of our climate policy requirement. The answer is yes. So we do have a threshold. So we report on two things. One is, so we assign ESG risk grade. We also assign climate change classification. So climate change classification, it's a regulatory requirement. So if you are a business, whether SME or non-SME, we need to classify you. As an individual, it's not necessary yet. It's really on the business side. So for us, we have actually set a threshold of 10 million. So if your exposure is less than 10 million, and if you are not in any of the 8 sectors that MBank considers to be susceptible to ESG risk, then automatically we give you a certain default of classification. So no extra work needed. If you belong to any of the 8 sectors, we still have to talk to you, get more information, and give you a certain classification. Anything beyond 10 million, then we'll do the ESG risk assessment and the climate change classification. So that's where we'll talk to you, get more information, because this is a journey that everybody has to be on. Because, you know, guys, if you're not on this together, seriously, there will not be a future for our children's children, at least.
All right, we come to the end, but before that, I would like each of you give your concluding statement. We start with Max, Ikhwan, and then Datin.
So I think we hear enough today about the challenges faced by SME as they transition. We understand a transition toward a sustainable business practice. It's difficult for SME. Let's face it. They have constraints. They have other priorities that they have to deal with. And I will not discount the usefulness of government subsidy, incentive, etc. But we do believe that the power of customer of large corporation and demand cannot be overstated, because at the end of the day, you need to align this. Like Ikwan said, no matter how green you are, if you're not making money, they are still not going to provide financing for you. And I think so we need to align the economic forces with sustainable objective. So that's why the GVC is designed to start with a large corporation so that they can drive a ripple effect in the SMEs ecosystem, so that they have to consciously choose to work with SME that is practicing this green, that has they have the number, they have the practices, etc. And they can further stimulate this transition by providing the necessary assistance. Right? For example, the GVC's program, you get the training, you get the solution provider to go green, and then of course you get the financing. So that's kind of what we are trying to do, package it in a nice, I guess, a nice program, so that they can drive sustainability towards the supply chain. And lastly, like I said, SME has a lot of things on their mind. So if you can make something easy, simple, with training, with financing, with solution, it should help them to decarbonize, to go green easier. And then we are actually working very closely with Datin. We have a lot of programs, etc., to help. But please, just drop by our booth so that we can discuss further. Thank you.
Okay, so
just from 2 perspectives I want to share. One is my, I guess, key takeaway to my DFI peers. So coming from commercial bank, I'm very keen that we collaborate. So how can we collaborate? There are actually a couple of ways in which I think we can collaborate. Number one is because we've got different mandates. So your customers who have reached maybe a certain level of maturity, then this is where you can potentially work with us and see we can free up your capital and we can actually continue bringing them to the next level. So in fact, we're already working with one DFI, the CEO is here, on that aspect. Secondly, is question of risk sharing and also cross referral. So there are customers where wanting to go green, but without our appetite, and vice versa. So this is where the cross referral can take place. And again, MBank already started speaking to a couple of DFIs on these 2 methods of how we can collaborate. Now to the SMEs, I think 3 or 4 messages. Number one, I know that when you see, especially the slide, and I have to rethink how I can reject this, is people can actually get scared. So my key message is, don't get scared. Then you might say, very oxymoronic. Then you show all this requirement and then you say don't get scared. So I might be smoking something. Because ultimately, okay, there is this concept called just and orderly transition. It's actually a regulatory requirement. Yeah? So Dr. Hamim will make sure that all banks behave ensure a just and orderly transition. So that what that means in practice is that as much as we've got these requirements, we appreciate the limitations which SME have because we also have that limitations. So the intent is not for us to stop deploying credit. That's not the intention. The intention is that we're able to deploy credit in a responsible fashion. So that is why, even though we've got these requirements, but that's why I said that, remember the so what statement? Actually, we haven't really enforced it. It's just a question of getting our customers, our relationship managers, our credit officers to be accustomed to the need to look at beyond the credit or repayment aspect. Okay, so that's one. And then secondly, for banks like mBank, I mentioned we have got this beyond financing mindset, and we actually spend money, we invest money to undertake a number of capacity building efforts. It's not a fly-by-night thing. We've been doing it for 5-6 years. So like I mentioned about MBiz Club, MBiz Race, our conference series. And as a financier to the GBC program, at least the first financier, we actually allow our customers to attend training on the topics I mentioned. So again, I urge you by becoming a customer of mBank, so you can partake in this training program for free. Okay, so that's why we're quite privileged to be the first financier in this program. So there are a number of assistance by the government. So maybe on our end we need to do a better job to permeate this message to all the SMEs out there. But rest assured, help is there. Rest assured, we're not here to stop financing. We fully seized of the predicament and the challenges that you are in. And lastly, to my my SME customers or future SME customers is this. You are a business entity. It's natural, it's expected that you want to do something, it has to be based on profit. Yeah. And of course, if I talk about long term, as John Maynard Keynes said, we'll all be dead in the long term. So there's actually opportunities for you. So, that thing you mentioned about solar panel, that's actually an investment. It's a question of getting the right solar panel so that you can actually defray the cost of investment through the savings, right? So if you have that mindset that, yes, regulations will come on the SMEs, that's coming, and especially for those who actually export directly or indirectly to Europe, you can't run away. But the moment you have that different mindset that there are opportunities, then I think opportunities are really aplenty. So it's not only working with us because we're here to help. And don't be fearful. We're not here to make life difficult because it's a symbiotic relationship. But most importantly is please have that open mindset. These are actually not only costs, it's cost, but I would term it as investment because it will open up new opportunities for you.
So for me, just take the example that just now I giving to everybody about the solar and the upgradation of the machineries. It's like when we have these ideas and then we start because where I need to get this fund from, because it's the upgradation, right? Yeah, that is my headache for now, because I don't know who can tell me that how can I be qualified to claim for the green loans. That is how low as a SME to understand from bank point of view to release the loan to us. So I hope also don't shut us down so fast, then suddenly your T&C change overnight. I think you need to give us some time to adopt on, to get used and understanding for that. Yeah, so this is my requirement. Yeah, thanks.
Agree. Nurturing the SMEs, nurturing the companies is very important on this journey. Let's give them the round of applause.